Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The night air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as the car slowed to a halt. Tall trees loomed in the distance, casting long shadows under the pale light of the moon. Tucked away deep in the heart of a forest, hidden from the world, stood an old lodge, its windows dark and uninviting. The road that led to it had been long, winding, and seemingly endless. For miles there had been no signs of life, just the oppressive stillness of nature. "You sure this is the right place?" Claire asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. She glanced at the map on her phone, its signal weak in the remote wilderness. "Yeah, it's the one," her companion Luke replied, adjusting his grip on the steering wheel. "This is the place we booked." The lodge, though imposing, looked almost like something from a storybook, a building frozen in time. It had been an impulse decision, one of those get-away-from-it-all moments, but now that they were here, doubts crept in. The silence was deafening. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. As the engine turned off and the headlights faded into the night, Claire and Luke stepped out of the car. The gravel beneath their boots crunched as they made their way toward the door, their footsteps swallowed by the vast emptiness around them. The door creaked open, revealing the darkened interior, lit only by the faint glow of a single candle resting on a table. Inside, the lodge was exactly what they expected, a charming but somewhat run-down escape from the world. The wooden beams overhead creaked, and the walls were adorned with old tapestries that seemed to depict strange, almost otherworldly scenes. "Hello," Luke called out, his voice echoing in the quiet. "Is anyone here?" No answer, just the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. As they stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind them with an unnerving force. The candle flickered, casting long shadows across the room. A chill ran down Claire's spine. Something about the place didn't feel right. But it was too late to turn back now. The door had slammed shut behind them with a finality that felt almost deliberate. The gust of wind outside seemed to linger, as though trying to push its way back inside, but it was powerless against the thick stone walls of the lodge. Claire stood still for a moment, her hand resting on the cold, rusted doorknob. The air inside the lodge was heavy, not in the musty old house way, but in something more oppressive, as if the building itself were breathing with a quiet, menacing rhythm. Luke, however, had already shrugged off the chill in the air. "Maybe it's just the wind," he muttered, looking around the dim room. "Old place, old things. It's bound to make some noise." "Yeah, maybe," Claire replied, though her voice lacked the same conviction. She glanced around uneasily, her eyes catching the flickering shadows on the walls. The candlelight was weak, struggling against the growing darkness that seemed to press in from every corner. The room they had entered was a large, open space with a fireplace at one end, its hearth cold and empty. An old, overstuffed armchair sat beside it, facing the windows, as if someone had been waiting for a long time and had simply never left. The floors creaked underfoot, the wooden planks bending with each step. Despite the apparent age of the place, there was a strange sense of preservation, as though time itself had paused within these walls. Claire shivered again, this time from something other than the cold. It was a feeling that crawled up her spine, a sensation that lingered at the edge of her senses like a whisper just out of reach. She wasn't sure what it was, but something in the air felt wrong. "I'm going to check out the bedrooms," she said, trying to sound casual. "We should get some rest. It's been a long drive." Luke nodded, clearly eager to settle in, although he too seemed to feel the odd tension in the air. "Yeah, sure. I'll unpack the bags." As they split up, Claire moved down a narrow hallway that led to the rooms. The walls here were adorned with dark portraits, the faces of people who seemed to stare at her with lifeless eyes, their features barely visible in the low light. A heavy wooden door creaked open in front of her, revealing a room that looked to have been untouched for decades. It was a strange blend of antique and rustic, with a large four-poster bed covered in thick, faded blankets. An ornate dresser stood against one wall, its surface cluttered with dust and old trinkets, things that might have once had meaning, now forgotten. A small window framed the night sky outside, and Claire felt drawn to it, her eyes searching the trees beyond. But it wasn't the forest that caught her attention. It was the reflection. There, standing in the shadows behind her, a figure flickered at the edge of her vision. She spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. Just the empty room, the faint scent of old wood, and the eerie silence. She was sure she had seen something, or someone, but when she turned, it vanished, like a mirage fading before her eyes. Her pulse quickened, but she brushed it off as a trick of the light. "It's just my imagination," she thought, forcing herself to take a deep breath. She wasn't one to jump at shadows. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone in this place. She moved away from the window, setting down her bag by the bed. But as she did, something else caught her attention. A small, intricately carved box sitting atop the dresser. It wasn't like the other dusty trinkets. It was too polished, too out of place in the decaying room. Claire reached out and lifted the box, its weight surprisingly heavy in her hands. The lid was sealed tightly, but she found a tiny latch on the side. Her fingers hesitated for just a moment before she lifted it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a necklace, a delicate silver chain with a small pendant shaped like a bird in flight. The pendant gleamed under the dim light, almost as if it had just been made. It was beautiful, but something about it felt wrong. A tinge of unease prickled at her skin as she stared at it. She reached out, but just as her fingers brushed the pendant, a sharp, hollow knock echoed through the room. Claire froze, her hand hovering over the box. The knock had come from the other side of the door. Her heart leapt into her throat. Who could it be? She set the box down quickly, rushing to the door and opening it. The hallway was empty. "Hello?" she called, her voice tight. "Is someone there?" Nothing. Just the silence, stretching out like a thick fog. This place is getting to me, Claire thought, trying to laugh it off. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She turned back to the room. But then the box had moved. It wasn't where she had left it. The necklace was gone. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the now empty space where the carved box had once been. Her breath caught in her throat, and she took a step forward, almost afraid to touch the dresser again. The air in the room felt thick, as though something unseen was pressing against her, forcing her to hold her breath. She spun around to the door, certain someone had slipped in behind her. But the hallway was still, bathed in shadow, as silent as the grave. The house seemed to grow quieter with each passing second, its oppressive stillness pressing in on her. Claire's pulse raced as she stepped back into the room, her eyes searching every corner. "Luke?" she called out, her voice shaky. There was no answer. She walked toward the bed, her steps slow, deliberate. Each creak of the floorboard sounded impossibly loud in the dead silence of the room. She reached the nightstand beside the bed and placed her hands on the surface, feeling the cold wood under her fingertips. As she looked around once more, something caught her eye, a shadow, deeper than the surrounding darkness, flitting across the floor. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, slipping between the furniture, weaving in and out like a living thing. She gasped, stumbling backward, but there was nothing there when she turned around. Nothing except the heavy silence. But now the room felt more oppressive, more alive with something unseen, something watching. Her mind raced, her thoughts tumbling over one another, desperate to rationalize what she was experiencing. It's just the house. It's old. It's creaky. The shadows, they're just shadows. She repeated these thoughts to herself, but the unease didn't dissipate. The feeling of being watched, of being followed, settled heavily in her chest. Something was in here with her. She couldn't ignore it any longer. With a deep breath, Claire moved quickly to the door and stepped out into the hallway. The moment she left the room, the pressure in her chest lightened slightly, but only just. The hall stretched out before her, the darkened windows at either end letting in barely enough moonlight to illuminate the dust-covered furniture lining the walls. The lodge was vast, far too large for a simple getaway, and now that she was awake and alert, it felt more like a maze than a home. The air here felt colder the deeper she ventured, and every creak of the wooden floors underfoot made her jump, her nerves fraying with each step. "Luke?" she called again, her voice more uncertain this time. There was no response. He had been right behind her when they entered, but now she couldn't find him. The silence was deafening. She moved cautiously toward the kitchen, hoping to find him. The corridor leading there was lined with faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, with cracks running along the walls. The deeper she went, the more she felt like the house itself was shifting, changing, responding to her every step. The walls seemed to groan and creak, as if the very foundation of the lodge were alive, its ancient bones protesting her intrusion. Turning the corner into the kitchen, Claire froze. There, standing in the doorway, was Luke. But something was off. He stood perfectly still, his face expressionless, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that felt unnatural. He didn't say a word, didn't move, just stared. "Luke?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond. He just stood there. Her heartbeat quickened, and for a moment Claire hesitated, unsure of what to do. But her instinct screamed at her to act, to move. Something wasn't right. Suddenly she heard a faint whisper, so soft it might have been carried on the wind. It seemed to come from behind Luke, just beyond the doorway, like a distant voice speaking in a language she didn't understand. The sound was eerie, faint but insistent, and it only grew louder the longer she stood there watching him. Without thinking, Claire took a step back, bumping into the counter behind her. The sound from the other side of the doorway intensified, almost like a chant, growing louder and more desperate. It was then that Claire noticed the shadows, dark, writhing shapes that seemed to emerge from the walls and floor, curling around Luke's feet like smoke. "Luke, what's happening?" Her voice trembled as she took another step back, her mind racing. Was he in some kind of trance? The shadows stretched out, growing longer, darker, more sinister. The whispering grew louder, now unmistakably inhuman, and suddenly, without warning, Luke's head jerked to the side, his body lurching forward as if pulled by some unseen force. His mouth opened wide, but no sound came out. His eyes, wide with terror, seemed to plead for help, but from whom? Claire felt the pressure in her chest return with full force. This isn't him. This isn't Luke. Without thinking, she turned and fled. The footsteps behind her were swift, too swift. She didn't dare look back. The lodge, once so still, now felt like a nightmare that was just beginning to wake. The walls seemed to pulse, the shadows moving like living things, closing in on her. As she ran down the hallway, she reached the stairs, cold, wooden, and narrow. She bolted up them, her feet slipping on the slick wood. The whispers were now a cacophony, a chorus of voices that filled the space around her, vibrating through the walls and floorboards. She turned sharply at the top of the stairs, running down the next hallway, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The old portraits on the walls seemed to move as she passed, their eyes following her every step. The very house felt alive, watching, waiting. Claire reached the end of the hall and turned into another room, slamming the door behind her. She leaned against it, her heart pounding in her chest. She was trapped. Trapped in a house that wanted to devour her, its walls closing in, its darkness wrapping around her like a tightening noose. From the other side of the door, she could hear Luke's voice, soft at first, a low murmur almost inaudible. But as time passed, it grew louder, distorted, twisted, as though something was trying to force its way through. It wasn't Luke anymore. It was something else, something far worse. Claire pressed her back against the door, the cold wood digging into her spine. The whispers outside the room grew louder, now clearly more than just murmurs. They were voices, shifting and overlapping, each one distorted, as if trying to claw their way through the very fabric of the lodge. The words were incomprehensible, but they felt like they were speaking directly to her, burrowing into her mind with an insistent hum. "Luke?" she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. She didn't know why she still called out to him. It wasn't Luke out there anymore. She knew that deep down, but some part of her still hoped. Hoped for something, anything, that could explain the horror unfolding before her. She strained her ears, trying to pick out a single familiar sound. But there was nothing. Only the frantic, crawling whispers, like thousands of voices trapped in a perpetual state of half-life. The very air in the room felt thick, suffocating, as though the lodge itself were closing in on her, unwilling to let her go. Claire had to move. She couldn't stay here. The lodge was playing with her, mocking her, and she felt it deep in her bones. She couldn't let it break her. Not yet. With a surge of resolve, she pushed away from the door, her breath coming in quick bursts. She needed to find a way out. The house was alive, twisted with whatever dark presence had taken root within it, but she couldn't stay in this room. Not when it felt like the walls were watching her. She glanced around. The room she was in appeared to be some kind of study, with a heavy, antique desk covered in dust, bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, and a single dim lamp in the corner. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Her eyes were drawn to the far wall, where a large mirror hung, its surface tarnished by age. She could see only her own reflection, pale and wide-eyed, her fingers trembling as she wiped a strand of hair from her face. But as she stared into the mirror, something shifted. At first, it was so subtle that she almost missed it. The shadow of her reflection wavered, just for a fraction of a second, like a breeze stirring the surface of still water. But then, the shadow in the mirror grew, stretching unnaturally across the floor. It wasn't her own shadow anymore. It was something else. Something dark and formless. Her heart skipped a beat. The reflection in the mirror smiled. A slow, wide grin that was far too sharp, far too unnatural. The corners of its mouth stretched impossibly wide, the teeth too long, the eyes too hollow. Claire gasped and took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. The reflection tilted its head, its smile growing. It saw her. It knew she was there. With a swift motion, Claire turned away from the mirror, her heart hammering in her chest. She couldn't look at it any longer, not with that thing staring back at her. Her mind was racing, thoughts colliding in a frenzy of panic and confusion. What is this place? What's happening to Luke? Her gaze shifted toward the door, which was still shaking in its frame, the whispers growing louder by the second. It was trying to break through, she realized. The thing in the hallway. It was him. But not him. Her mind reeled as she tried to comprehend what she was feeling. Luke was gone. This wasn't him. It couldn't be. The darkness outside the door pulsed with an almost tangible hunger, as if the house itself was waiting for her to make a mistake, for her to open the door. But she couldn't stay here either. Claire knew she had to escape. She had to get out even if she didn't know where out was. She grabbed the first thing she could find, a dusty old lamp, and hurled it toward the door. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, and for a split second, everything went silent. The whispers stopped. The shadows froze. But only for a moment. Suddenly, the walls groaned and the ground beneath her feet shifted, as if the house was alive, breathing, shifting its weight. Claire staggered back, nearly losing her balance as the room began to shake. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to twist and writhe, rising into the air like dark, tendrilled smoke. The mirror shimmered, and for a moment, it felt like the glass was alive and watching her every move. From the hallway, the whispers returned, but they were louder now, sharper, angrier. Claire, the voice was so soft it could have been a breath against her ear, but it wasn't a breath. It was Luke's voice. Her name, spoken from the other side of the door, barely a whisper. Claire. The sound crawled under her skin, a cold, clammy feeling that made her want to scream, but her throat was dry. She couldn't scream. She couldn't even move. And then the door began to open. Slowly. Relentlessly. Claire's breath caught in her throat as the door creaked, inching outward, the shadows beyond it thick and oppressive. The air grew heavier, colder, and she realized with growing terror that the thing that had been calling her wasn't Luke anymore. It wasn't even human. It was something else. She bolted toward the window, her hands shaking as she tried to pry it open, her fingers slick with sweat. The whispers grew louder, the chanting now an unmistakable rhythm, like a heartbeat pounding through the walls. Luke? She choked out, her voice broken, barely a whisper. Luke, please, where are you? But there was no answer. The window finally opened with a screech of old metal, and Claire stumbled back, nearly falling as she looked down at the ground below. It was a long way down, but there was no choice. She had to get out. She had to escape this place before it consumed her, before whatever had taken Luke got to her too. With a burst of adrenaline, she climbed through the window, the cold night air rushing against her face. She didn't look back, not even once. But as her feet hit the ground and she turned toward the forest, a deep voice, gravelly, distorted, whispered from the lodge behind her. You can't run forever, Claire. The house was alive and it would follow her. Claire's feet hit the forest floor with a muted thud, her legs weak from the shock of the jump. She barely registered the cold sting of the earth beneath her shoes as she scrambled away from the lodge. The trees, dark and towering, seemed to loom around her, their gnarled branches twisting like fingers reaching out to claim her. The night was thick with fog, rolling in from the dense undergrowth and swirling around her ankles, making each step feel like it was sinking into the earth itself. I have to keep moving. The thought was simple, primal, driving her forward through the dense woods. The whispers from the lodge still echoed in her mind, sharp and insistent. You can't run forever, Claire. The words clung to her, wrapping around her thoughts like vines. The voices were all around her, even now, trailing her through the forest. She could almost hear them in the wind, in the rustling leaves, in the eerie silence between her breaths. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm that seemed to match the pounding of the earth beneath her. She couldn't stop. She couldn't let whatever had taken Luke get to her. The thought of him, his pale face, his blank stare, it made her stomach twist with dread. He was still out there, somewhere. But where? And what had happened to him? Every step seemed to take her deeper into the forest, further away from the lodge, but it didn't feel like she was escaping. It felt like the forest itself was drawing her in, guiding her toward something. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it. This oppressive presence, like the land itself, was watching her, waiting. She stumbled over a root, her hands flailing to catch herself. The fog thickened, clouding her vision, but she forced herself back to her feet. She had to find a way out. She couldn't afford to let the terror of the forest swallow her whole. Not now. Not when she was so close. The trees were closing in on her, their trunks growing thicker and more twisted the further she went. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, deeper, as if the night itself had come alive. A low, guttural growl echoed through the woods, distant but unmistakable. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't anything she could name. Her breath hitched and her pulse quickened. She wasn't alone. The trees parted suddenly, revealing a small clearing bathed in a ghostly, pale light. In the center stood something that shouldn't have been there. A stone well, ancient and weathered, its surface covered in thick layers of moss. The air around it was heavy, almost thick with energy. The wind didn't reach this place. The forest had gone eerily still. For a moment, Claire just stared at the well, her mind racing with questions she didn't have answers to. Something about it called to her, something ancient and powerful, a quiet hum beneath the surface that made her skin crawl. She had to approach. Every instinct told her to turn and run, but another force, something deep inside her, urged her forward, as if it was the only way out. As if this well held the key to breaking free of the curse that had taken hold of the lodge. Slowly, her feet carried her forward, each step hesitant but unstoppable. The fog seemed to draw closer, wrapping around her legs like tendrils of cold mist, as though it were trying to drag her into the earth itself. She reached the well, the stone cold beneath her fingers as she gripped the edge. It was old, older than anything she'd ever seen. There were strange symbols carved into the stone, barely visible beneath the layers of moss and grime. They looked like they were from a language she didn't recognize, ancient, perhaps, or forgotten. Claire leaned in, her breath fogging up the surface of the well, her fingers brushing the edges of the symbols. Her eyes traced them, her mind trying to make sense of the cryptic designs. There was something wrong about them, something that made her skin prickle with unease. She had the sudden, inexplicable urge to jump in, to throw herself into the well and let whatever lay beneath consume her, to escape the suffocating grip of the forest and the cursed lodge. But she resisted. She wasn't sure why, but she knew that giving in to that pull would be the last thing she ever did. Instead, she took a step back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers had faded, but in their place came a low, almost imperceptible hum, a sound that seemed to emanate from deep within the well itself. It wasn't the wind or the forest or anything natural. It was something else, something darker. She looked around, scanning the clearing, feeling the weight of the forest pressing in on her from all sides. The trees had grown unnervingly quiet, as if holding their breath, waiting. Claire could hear her own heartbeat, her breaths, but nothing else. The feeling of being watched returned, more intense than ever. The air grew colder. Then a voice. It came from deep within the well, so faint she almost missed it. "Help me." Claire froze. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. It sounded like Luke, like the voice she had heard calling her in the lodge, but distorted, hollow. It was his voice, but it wasn't him. She knew that now. This wasn't just some trick of the mind. There was something else down there. Something that had taken him. Luke? Her voice was weak, barely a whisper, but it felt like it could be heard across the entire forest. "Is that you?" The voice responded, but it wasn't Luke's anymore. It was something deeper, more guttural, like 1,000 voices layered on top of each other. "Help me escape." Claire's heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She took another step back, her gaze fixed on the dark, yawning hole of the well. It was as if the shadows were breathing, pulling the darkness in, pulling her in. Then she saw something move. From the edge of the well, a thin, skeletal hand shot out, grasping at the air. The fingers were long, unnaturally thin, and as pale as bone. The hand curled and twisted, its fingers jerking in spasms, reaching for her. Claire screamed, stumbling backward, but before she could run, something pulled at her, a tug from deep within the earth. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, the earth giving way, and she was falling into the darkness. Claire's scream echoed through the air, but it was swallowed by the earth. The ground seemed to open beneath her, the soil pulling away as though it had been waiting for her, hungry for her to fall into its dark embrace. She tumbled through the air, her heart hammering in her chest, and for one terrifying moment she thought she might be falling into some kind of void. The trees, the clearing, the lodge, all of it vanished as the world around her shifted, becoming an inky abyss. But then the fall stopped. The sudden jarring halt made her stomach lurch, and she cried out, scrambling for anything to steady herself. Her hands found cold stone, slick with moisture, and she clung to it, her fingers desperately trying to find purchase in the darkness. The air was thick and damp, heavy with the scent of earth and decay. She slowly forced her eyes open, her breath shallow, trying to make sense of her surroundings. What she saw was worse than she could have imagined. She had fallen into a cavern, an underground labyrinth of dark stone and twisting roots that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The walls were damp, glistening with moisture that dripped steadily, echoing in the vast hollow space. The only source of light was the faint, eerie glow of phosphorescent moss clinging to the walls. It gave the cavern an unsettling, unnatural appearance, as if the very stones themselves were alive, pulsating with some ancient, malevolent energy. Claire pushed herself up from the ground, her hands trembling as she scanned the darkness around her. Her heart was racing, but she fought to keep her mind sharp. This isn't real. It's a dream. I have to wake up. She whispered the mantra to herself, trying to convince her racing thoughts that she wasn't truly trapped beneath the earth. But deep down she knew it was real. A faint, distant sound reached her ears, something soft yet unmistakable. A low murmur like a chant, drifting on the stale air. It was the same whispering that had haunted her in the lodge, the same voices that had followed her through the woods. They were here too, alive in the cavern, echoing from the walls. The voices grew louder, sharper, and Claire instinctively took a step back. Her body moved on its own, trying to escape the oppressive feeling in the air. There was no way forward, no clear path. The cavern stretched out before her like a labyrinth, each turn just as dark and claustrophobic as the next. She could feel something watching her, something waiting, its presence so heavy it nearly crushed her chest. And then, out of the darkness, she saw it. A shape, shifting in the distance, moving just out of her line of sight. It was too large to be a person, too wrong to be anything human. It was like a shadow, but no ordinary shadow. It writhed and twisted, constantly shifting, as though it were made of the very darkness that surrounded her. The figure moved with an unnatural fluidity, sliding along the walls like a serpent, its form distorting and expanding as it approached. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She had to get away. She had to escape whatever that thing was before it reached her. Her mind raced as she backed away, but her legs felt like they were made of lead. The more she tried to move, the heavier the air became, like invisible hands were gripping her, holding her in place. And then the thing spoke. Its voice wasn't human. There were no words, just a deep, guttural hum that vibrated in her chest. It was a sound that made her bones ache, a voice that scraped at her very soul. Claire shuddered involuntarily, her whole body trembling in response. "You are not meant to be here." The words echoed in her head, reverberating through her skull like thunder. Her heart slammed against her ribs and she stumbled back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The thing wasn't speaking to her with its mouth, but somehow she could hear it, feel it. The presence of its voice was like a physical force, pushing her into the cold stone of the cavern. The shadows coiled around her, inching closer, and Claire realized with growing horror that the thing was not just speaking, it was feeding on her fear. The air grew colder still, the darkness deeper, and she felt a sickening sense of dread flooding her chest. And then, from the shadows, another voice joined the chorus, Luke's voice. Oh. Claire's blood ran cold as his voice echoed in her mind, hollow and distorted. "Claire, help me." The voice was distant, strained, as though it were coming from deep within the earth itself. It was still Luke, but it wasn't him. It couldn't be. She spun around, desperately looking for the source of the voice, but there was nothing. Only darkness. Only the twisting shadows that threatened to consume her whole. "Luke!" she screamed, her voice cracking as she fell to her knees, tears burning her eyes. "Please, where are you?" The sound of his voice echoed through the cavern, but it was followed by another, more sinister laugh, soft, low, and mocking. Claire's stomach churned, and the air around her seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides. "You will never leave." The words pierced her like ice, and the shadows seemed to rush toward her, stretching out their tendrils, reaching for her with fingers that were long and impossibly thin. The walls of the cavern seemed to close in, the darkness suffocating her. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. And then, with a sudden flash of clarity, she realized something. The cavern wasn't just a place. It was a prison. She wasn't meant to escape. She had never been meant to escape. The voices, the whispers, they were the echoes of the forest, of the lodge, of whatever ancient presence had lived here long before her. The thing she had felt watching her, the thing that had pulled her here, it was part of the forest. It was part of the earth beneath the lodge, waiting for the right moment to claim her, just as it had claimed Luke. The walls seemed to pulse with an awful rhythmic beat, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. And in the distance, Claire could hear the faintest sound of something, someone, moving through the cavern, slowly, methodically. Her eyes widened in terror as the figure drew closer, its form now clear in the dim glow of the moss. It was Luke, but not. His eyes were hollow. His face was pale and gaunt, the skin stretched taut over his bones. He was moving slowly, his limbs jerking with each step, as if they weren't fully under his control. The shadowy tendrils that had emerged from the well were wrapped around him, pulling him forward, controlling his movements. His mouth was open in a silent scream, his voice lost to whatever cursed thing had claimed him. "Claire," his voice was barely a whisper, but she could hear the desperation in it, feel the plea in the air. "Help me." The darkness was all around her now, closing in, and she knew, with terrifying certainty, that there was no way out. The shadows seemed to close in on Claire from all sides, thick and oppressive, the air heavy with the weight of the cavern. The dark figure, Luke, or what was left of him, stumbled closer, his movements jerky and unnatural, as though he were being puppeteered by some unseen force. His hollow eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, a flicker of recognition passed between them. A memory, maybe, of the man she had known, the one who had once laughed with her under the stars, who had shared secrets and whispered promises of forever. But that man was gone. Luke's mouth opened again, but this time the sound that came out wasn't his. It was a low, guttural growl, a sound that made the hairs on the back of Claire's neck stand on end. It wasn't a human noise. It was something dark, ancient, something otherworldly that had claimed him. "Help me!" The voice was no longer Luke's. His words were distorted, wrapped in layers of anguish and despair. The hollow echo reverberated around the cavern, mixing with the low hum of the forest that pulsed from the walls themselves. Claire's heart raced. She couldn't move. Her feet felt like they were cemented into place, as if the earth itself were holding her captive, unwilling to let her go. Her breath caught in her throat, and she forced herself to swallow the lump that had formed there. She knew that whatever this was, whatever had happened to Luke, she had to make a choice. She had to act. The air around her was thick with a strange pressure, like the forest was watching, waiting for her to make her move. She could feel the presence in the shadows, could feel it creeping along her skin, watching, waiting to consume her as it had consumed Luke. The walls of the cavern seemed to hum, vibrating in tune with the pulse of the forest above. It was as if the entire underground world was alive, a dark, malevolent heart beating beneath the surface of the earth. The whispers were growing louder again, filling her head, repeating the same words over and over, a chant that reverberated deep in her bones. "You cannot escape. You are one of us. Forever." A scream caught in her throat as she spun around, her eyes darting through the cavern. She couldn't stay here. She had to get out. She had to survive. But before she could make a move, the cavern's walls seemed to shift. The stones groaned as if alive, and the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The dark figure, Luke, staggered toward her, its limbs contorting, and the twisted shadows that surrounded him began to take shape, becoming something more. The shadows were moving, crawling from the stone, stretching toward her. They were no longer just shadows. They were creatures with long, spindly limbs and sharp claws, their forms made of the very darkness that filled the cavern. Their eyes gleamed in the faint light, glowing like molten coals, and they hissed, a sound that was half-formed, like the crackling of fire. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she stumbled backward, the weight of the forest pressing down on her chest, making it harder and harder to breathe. She could feel the creatures drawing closer, could feel their hunger in the air, could hear their claws scraping against the stone as they closed in around her. She had to get away. She had to survive. But where? There was nowhere to go. The cavern stretched out endlessly, and the shadows were closing in. Then, from the depths of the cavern, a voice spoke. It was not Luke's. It was something older, ancient beyond measure. Its voice was low, rumbling through the very earth beneath her, a voice that seemed to come from the trees themselves, from the roots that wound deep into the soil. "You are mine." The words were a command, a pronouncement, and Claire felt them wash over her like cold water, seeping into her very soul. She felt the weight of the forest pressing on her chest, suffocating her, dragging her down into the abyss. The figure of Luke reached out, his hand trembling as it stretched toward her, his eyes wide with terror. No. The thought struck her like lightning, and suddenly, something inside her snapped. She couldn't let it happen. She wouldn't let it. She wouldn't let the forest take her, just like it had taken him. With a surge of desperation, she turned, her legs finally moving, her body propelled forward by pure instinct. She ran. Her feet slammed against the stone floor, echoing through the cavern as she sprinted, weaving between the twisted roots and jagged rocks. The creatures behind her hissed, their claws scraping against the stone as they followed, relentless. The whispers in the air grew louder, like a chorus of voices, urging her to turn back, to stop running, but she refused to listen. She could hear the sound of Luke's voice in her mind again, the distorted plea for help, but this time, it wasn't just a voice. It was something deeper, more primal, something that gripped her heart with an icy hand. It was as if the very forest was reaching out, pulling at her, trying to drag her back into its depths. The walls of the cavern seemed to close in around her, the ground shifting beneath her feet, the shadows stretching toward her. But she kept running, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her legs aching with every step. The air grew colder, the darkness deeper. She could feel the creatures closing in, their presence a cold weight on her shoulders. And then, just when it felt like she could run no more, she saw it. A light. It was faint at first, just a glimmer in the distance, but it grew brighter as she ran toward it, cutting through the suffocating dark like a beacon. It was a small, flickering flame, casting long shadows across the cavern walls. She pushed herself harder, her legs burning, her lungs aching as she sprinted toward the light. And then, with one final, desperate leap, she reached it. She burst through a narrow opening in the stone, tumbling into the space beyond. The air was warmer here, the oppressive weight of the forest lifting just slightly. She found herself standing in a small, dimly lit chamber, the walls lined with glowing moss and strange symbols etched into the stone. The air was thick with the scent of earth and something else, something metallic like blood. The light was coming from a small, flickering flame in the center of the room. A fire burning bright and steady, casting long shadows on the walls. It was the only light in the chamber, and Claire's heart leaped with a mixture of relief and confusion. There, standing beside the fire, was a figure. A woman. She was tall and regal, dressed in robes of deep green, the fabric embroidered with symbols that seemed to shift and change in the firelight. Her hair was long, silver, cascading down her back like a river of moonlight. Her eyes, pale and unblinking, locked onto Claire's with a gaze that seemed to pierce through her very soul. "Welcome," the woman said, her voice low and melodic, yet carrying the weight of centuries. "Who are you?" Claire gasped, still trembling from her flight through the cavern. "I am the keeper of the forest," the woman replied, her voice echoing softly around the chamber. "And you have been chosen." Claire's heart still raced in her chest, her breath ragged and uneven. She stood in the dim light of the chamber, facing the woman who had appeared so suddenly. The keeper. Her gaze, pale and unblinking, seemed to cut through Claire, piercing her very essence. There was something ancient in the way the woman stood, something otherworldly, a presence that felt as though it had existed for eons, watching over the forest, guarding its secrets. The fire flickered softly in the center of the room, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. The chamber felt like a sacred place, a forgotten world hidden deep beneath the earth, and Claire could almost feel the weight of time pressing down on her. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift, their meanings elusive, slipping from her mind the moment she tried to focus on them. It was as though the room itself was alive, its history stretching back to an age when the world was younger, darker. The keeper's voice broke the silence, low and melodic, yet filled with an unsettling power. "You've crossed the threshold, Claire. You've entered the heart of the forest, where the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest." Claire's throat tightened, a sense of dread pooling in her stomach. What is this place? What is happening to Luke? Why have I been brought here? Her voice trembled, each word heavy with fear and confusion. The keeper stepped closer to the fire, her robes swirling around her like liquid shadows, and her pale eyes never left Claire's face. "This is where the forest's heart beats, the place where life and death are intertwined. This is where the forest will is strongest, where its ancient power resides." Claire's mind raced, trying to piece together what the keeper was saying. "The forest's heart? What do you mean? Just look. Is he still alive?" Her voice cracked as the memory of Luke, his distorted form, and the hollow echoes of his voice haunted her mind. The keeper's expression softened ever so slightly, though there was no warmth in it. "Luke is alive, but he is no longer who you knew. The forest has claimed him as it has claimed many before him. His soul is entwined with the land, with the dark energies that pulse beneath its surface." "No." Claire's voice was sharp, desperate. "He's not dead, he can't be. I need to help him. Please tell me how. What can I do?" The keeper's pale gaze shifted, and she nodded slowly, her lips barely moving. "There is no saving him. Not in the way you hope. The forest does not release its hold once it has claimed a soul. Those who enter here are never the same. Luke is a part of the forest now, as much as the trees, as much as the stones beneath your feet." Claire's heart sank, the weight of her words settling like a stone in her chest. She shook her head violently, refusing to believe it. "You're lying. You're wrong. There has to be a way." The keeper's eyes narrowed, the smallest trace of sorrow flickering in them before she spoke again. You do not understand. This forest has existed longer than you can imagine, and it feeds on those who are drawn to it. It feeds on their fears, their desires, their very essence. It is a living thing with its own will, its own hunger. And it has chosen you. Claire recoiled, her breath catching in her throat. Chosen me? Why me? I don't belong here. I was looking for a place to escape, to get away from everything, from the world. I never meant to escape. The keeper's voice cut through Claire's words, her tone sharp, almost pitying. You think you can escape the forest? That you can outrun its hunger? It does not work that way. The forest finds those it seeks, whether they know it or not. And once it has marked you, there is no going back. Claire's hands trembled at her sides, her mind reeling with the implications of what the keeper was saying. The forest, alive and hungry, had been watching her all along, pulling her toward it, drawing her in like prey. Her stomach churned as the weight of her realization hit her. This place had been waiting for her, and she had walked right into its grasp. The forest doesn't care for your innocence, Claire, the keeper continued, her voice softer now, though still filled with the quiet authority of something ancient. It cares only for what it can take. You feel its pull, don't you? The darkness that calls to you from the lodge. The whispers that follow you in the night. That is the forest reaching out, wrapping itself around your soul, pulling you deeper into its web. Claire's chest tightened as she recalled the whispers, the eerie presence that had been with her from the very moment they had entered the lodge. The shadows had followed her. The darkness had been waiting for her. You felt its pull since you arrived. You think the forest cares for your survival? No, it wants something else. What? Claire breathed, her voice barely a whisper. What does it want? The keeper's eyes glittered, and she stepped closer to the fire, her gaze flicking to the flames. It craves the living. It desires the essence of those who walk its paths. Your fears, your regrets, your grief, these things feed the forest's hunger. And once it has fed, it will grow, spread deeper, consume more. Claire's mind reeled, the enormity of what the keeper was saying crashing over her like a wave. So I'm just another sacrifice? Just another soul to feed this place. The keeper's gaze softened, but there was no compassion in her eyes. Not a sacrifice. You are chosen. The forest has chosen you to be its next guardian. Just as it has chosen the others. Just as it has chosen Luke. Guardian? Claire's voice was thick with disbelief. I don't understand. Why would it choose me? What does that even mean? The keeper raised one delicate hand, and the flames in the fire flickered and danced, casting strange shadows on the walls. The forest has its own balance. Those who enter are consumed by it, but they are not lost. They become part of the forest. Its heart beats through them. Its will is carried by them. Claire's eyes widened. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the picture they formed was far darker than she could have imagined. You mean, I would become like Luke? Like one of them? A part of this thing? The keeper nodded, her expression impassive. Yes, the forest takes what it wants, and those it chooses are bound to it for eternity. You would walk its paths, feel its hunger, and guard its secrets. And when the time comes, you would pass that burden on to another. Claire's blood ran cold as the weight of the keeper's words sank in. She had been drawn here by the forest, by its will, by its hunger. She had been chosen not as a survivor, but as a vessel for its darkness. A part of it forever. Can't you stop it? Claire pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. Please, you have to stop it. I don't want to be part of this. I don't want to become one of them. The keeper's expression softened, but there was no kindness in her gaze. It is not something I can stop. The forest does not bow to the will of mortals. It exists beyond your understanding, beyond your control. All you can do now is choose. Will you embrace the forest as Luke did? Or will you fight against it and become like those before you? Lost, consumed, forgotten. Claire's heart pounded, the weight of the decision bearing down on her. The forest, the lodge, Luke, everything was a part of this cursed existence, and she had no choice but to make a decision. She couldn't become part of it. Not like Luke. She wouldn't let the forest take her. Not like that. But how could she fight it? The keeper's eyes bore into her, waiting for her answer. The air in the chamber thickened with the silence. The weight of the keeper's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Claire's chest tightened as she tried to process everything that had been said, every revelation that had shattered her understanding of what was real and what was not. The forest wasn't just a place. It wasn't just a backdrop to her fear. It was alive, A living, breathing entity feeding on the souls of the lost, twisting them into something else. Something darker. Her mind reeled, trying to grasp the enormity of it all. Luke, her dear, sweet Luke, wasn't dead, but he wasn't alive either. He was bound to the forest, an unwilling servant to its hunger. The thought made her stomach churn. Is that what awaited me? The keeper's gaze never wavered. Her pale eyes were unwavering, focused entirely on Claire, as though she were watching a fragile thread about to snap. The flickering light of the fire reflected in the keeper's robes, making her appear even more ethereal, like a being not quite of this world, a creature that belonged to the deep places where the sun never shone. The chamber around Claire seemed to pulse with the hum of the earth itself, the vibrations from the cavern's heart reverberating in her bones. It was as though the fire, the walls, and even the shadows were all waiting for her to make a decision, to choose the path that would determine her fate. How? Claire's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. How could I possibly choose this? Her eyes flicked to the dark corners of the chamber, then back to the keeper. Why did you even bring me here? Why tell me all of this? The keeper's lips parted, a faint smile playing on her face that sent a chill down Claire's spine. The forest does not choose its guardians lightly. It tests those who come to it, measuring their will, their strength. It has been watching you, Claire, ever since you first set foot in its domain. It sees your fears, your grief, your longing. The forest knows your heart. Claire recoiled, stepping back from the fire, her hands shaking. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like something was peering into her very soul, reading every secret, every fragile emotion she had ever buried. I don't want this, Claire whispered. I can't be part of it. The keeper's expression softened, but it was a cold softness, one that offered no comfort. The forest is not concerned with your wants. It cares only for its hunger. The forest does not need your consent, Claire. It only needs your essence, your soul. Claire's breath quickened. She felt dizzy, the weight of everything crashing down on her all at once. This wasn't real. This can't be happening. What happens if I refuse? She demanded, her voice trembling with defiance. What happens if I fight? The keeper's eyes darkened, her gaze intense and unyielding. You are not the first to make that choice. Those who try to defy the forest, they are not allowed to leave. The forest will take what it needs from them, whether they wish it or not. Her words were heavy, full of warning, yet they carried a certain inevitability. But even in defiance, they become part of the forest. Lost. Forgotten. Claire felt her stomach twist. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run, to tear herself out of this nightmare, but her feet felt frozen to the ground, as though the very stones beneath her were binding her, holding her here. How could this be happening? And what if I embrace it? She whispered, her voice barely audible. The keeper tilted her head slightly, considering the question. If you embrace the forest, if you accept its power, you become one with it. You become a part of its heart, its will. You will guard its secrets, feed its hunger, and in time, you will pass that curse on to another. Her voice dropped lower, almost as if she were speaking only to Claire. You will never know peace again. Your existence will be bound to the forest, its desires your own. You will be its protector and its prisoner. The fire crackled softly, the shadows in the room flickering with the light. Claire's heart thundered in her chest, her breath shallow and ragged. The weight of the keeper's words pressed down on her, suffocating her. She wanted to fight, to defy the forest, to tear herself away from this cursed fate, but the fear inside her, the hunger that lurked within the shadows, in the very air around her, made her wonder if she even had a choice. She thought of Luke, his twisted, lifeless form, the hollow look in his eyes. Could she really save him? Could he be freed from the forest's grip, or was he already too far gone? The keeper stepped closer, her movements fluid and graceful, her gaze never leaving Claire's. The forest does not care about your desires, Claire. It does not care about your love or your loss. It only cares for what it can consume. And if you fight it, you will only be lost. Forever. Claire's thoughts raced, her mind struggling to process everything. Escape was impossible. She could feel it in the air, thick with the pulse of the forest, with the very essence of the land itself. The forest is alive. It won't let me go. The keeper's voice broke through her thoughts again, soft but commanding. You cannot outrun it. You cannot hide from it. The forest will find you no matter where you go. It is inevitable. All you can do now is choose. Claire's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She didn't want to choose. She didn't want any of this. She didn't want to become a part of the forest, to be claimed by it, to lose herself to its hunger. But every moment she stood here, the forest's presence pressed harder against her, like a weight on her chest, slowly suffocating her. Her gaze flicked to Luke, standing in the shadows, his empty eyes locked onto hers. The twisted form of him, lost and broken, filled her with a mixture of sorrow and rage. She could feel it, the same pull that had drawn her here, the same darkness that had twisted him. It was reaching for her, like a hand from the grave trying to drag her down. A flash of fire lit up the cavern, and for the briefest of moments Claire saw herself, her own reflection, staring back at her in the dark, her face pale and hollow, her eyes vacant, empty. Could she become that? Could she truly become just another soul lost to the forest? The weight of the keeper's gaze bore into her, as though she were reading her thoughts. You have a choice, Claire. A choice between becoming part of the forest's heart, or becoming lost within it. Claire's throat constricted, her voice hoarse with emotion. I can't let it have me. I can't become part of this place. The keeper's face remained unreadable, her expression cold and distant. Then you must leave, if you are strong enough. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Leave? But how? The keeper's lips curled into a faint smile. If you wish to leave, you must pay the price. The keeper's words hung in the air, thick with menace and unspoken truths. Claire's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of her fear pressing down on her like a suffocating fog. The fire crackled in the center of the chamber, its flames dancing wildly as though reacting to the tension in the room. Shadows twisted and writhed along the walls, growing darker with each passing moment. She could feel the pull of the forest, its ancient hunger reaching out to her, clawing at her soul, whispering to her to give in, to let it claim her, to join it in its endless, twisting darkness. It was tempting. The idea of surrender, of simply becoming part of the forest, of giving in to its power, was a dark allure she couldn't ignore. But at what cost? What price? Claire forced the words out, her voice shaky, her throat dry. What do you mean by that? The keeper's pale eyes glimmered in the firelight, her expression unreadable. The price of freedom is steep, Claire. The forest does not let go easily. If you wish to escape, if you wish to leave this place and never return, you must pay the price. You must sacrifice what you hold most dear. Claire's stomach dropped. The word sacrifice felt like a weight around her neck, choking her, suffocating her. Sacrifice? She whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. What does that mean? What do you want from me? The keeper's lips parted slightly, but no smile came. There was no kindness in her gaze, only the cold certainty of something ancient and eternal. The forest requires a balance, Claire. It takes what it needs to survive, to grow. You've been chosen not just because you've entered its domain, but because you carry with you something vital. Something the forest wants. Claire's pulse quickened, her mind racing. She could feel the blood rushing in her ears, the roar of panic rising within her chest. What are you talking about? I don't have anything that the forest wants. The keeper's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Claire saw a flicker of something, perhaps pity, perhaps disdain, pass across her face. You do. The forest feeds not just on the flesh, but on the essence of those who enter. You carry with you your grief, your fears, your memories. The forest can taste them, can sense them in your very soul. And it wants them. Claire took a step back, her hands trembling at her sides. The keeper's words twisted like knives in her mind. Grief? Fear? Her memories? She couldn't breathe, the weight of what the keeper was saying crushing her. Her essence? No, she whispered, shaking her head, her voice barely audible. No, I can't give it that. I won't. The keeper took a step closer, her presence growing more imposing, more suffocating. If you do not sacrifice what the forest demands, it will claim you body and soul. You will become part of it, your essence consumed, your memories devoured. Forever lost, like all the others before you. Claire's knees felt weak. She couldn't breathe. Every part of her wanted to run, to escape, to forget all of this, but deep down she knew there was nowhere to go. The forest was too vast. Its hunger was too strong. And if I stay, I'll never leave. I don't have anything left to give. Claire's voice cracked, raw with emotion. I've already lost so much. I can't lose more. The keeper stood still, her expression softening ever so slightly, but it was not kindness that filled her eyes. It was the understanding of something that had seen countless souls come and go, each one clinging to their last thread of hope. She spoke again, her voice like the whisper of leaves in the wind, distant and resigned. You do not understand, Claire. Everything in this forest is a sacrifice. The trees, the stones, the very air you breathe, all of it is bound by the same rule. All things give something to the forest, and if you do not offer it willingly, it will take it from you anyway. Claire's legs buckled and she fell to her knees, the enormity of the situation crashing over her like a tidal wave. She thought of Luke, his eyes hollow and empty, his soul claimed by the forest. She thought of the whispers that had haunted her every step, the way the darkness had pressed in on her, always following, always waiting. Could she truly escape this place? Could she even survive without surrendering to it? The keeper's voice was quieter now, almost soothing. You do not have to do this. The forest has already taken so much. But if you wish to walk away, if you wish to leave this place, then you must give the forest something it wants in return. Something precious. Something it can feed on. A cold shiver ran down Claire's spine as she realized the truth of the keeper's words. The forest could take her memories, her soul, her very essence, and that would be the end of her. She would be a part of it forever, lost to the world, her identity swallowed by the shadows. But there had to be another way. There had to be a way to escape without losing herself. How do I choose? Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How can I know what to give? What does it want from me? What do I have left? The keeper stood silent for a moment, her gaze cold and unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice low and heavy with the weight of centuries. You must give up what you love most. The thing that you cling to, that holds your soul together. Your memories, your love, your past. The forest will take it, and in return it will let you go. You will be free. Claire's breath hitched in her throat. The words hung in the air like a curse. Her memories? The very thought of losing the moment she held dear, her memories of Luke, the life they had shared, the love they had known, was unbearable. But if she didn't make the sacrifice, then she would be trapped here in the forest forever. A shadow of herself. A ghost. The keeper's gaze softened, but the pity in her eyes was more chilling than any cruelty. You must choose, Claire. The forest will not wait. The price is steep, and the decision is yours alone. The chamber seemed to pulse with the weight of her words. The fire flickered and dimmed, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls, as if the very walls were listening. The forest was alive and hungry, and Claire was the next to be claimed. What do I give? Claire whispered, almost to herself. What do I have left to sacrifice? Her chest felt tight, the air heavy in her lungs. And then, as if from somewhere deep within her soul, a thought whispered, a flicker of realization. The forest didn't just want her memories. It wanted her love, her bond to Luke. The very thing that had led her here. She had no choice. Claire's heart pounded in her chest, the rhythm steady but loud, almost as if it were echoing through the very walls of the cavern. The air around her had thickened, the oppressive weight of the forest pressing in on her from all sides. She felt like a puppet, tangled in the forest strings, unable to escape, yet too paralyzed to make the choice that would determine her fate. The keeper stood before her, patient, her presence looming like the ancient trees outside the lodge. The fire between them flickered and hissed, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in time with Claire's rising panic. The keeper's pale eyes watched her with an unblinking intensity, like a predator sizing up its prey, waiting for her to make her move. What will you give? The keeper's voice was a soft murmur, but it felt like a thunderclap in the silence. It vibrated in Claire's chest, resonating through her very being. Claire closed her eyes, trying to force her mind to clear, to push back the rising tide of fear that was choking her. She could still feel Luke's presence in the dark corners of her mind, the faint memory of his laugh, of the way he used to hold her close, the way he had always promised to protect her. That promise, that connection was everything to her. And now it was the very thing the forest sought to claim. She thought of him, the man she loved, the man who had been twisted into something unrecognizable by the very thing she had come to fear. The echoes of his voice still haunted her, distorted and broken, like a cruel parody of everything they had been. She could hear it now, faintly whispering through the darkness. Help me, Claire. It felt like a plea from the depths of his soul, and for a brief moment, Claire believed that if she could somehow save him, if she could free him from the forest's grasp, she might be able to escape too. But the words of the keeper echoed in her mind, drowning out his voice. You cannot save him. The forest has taken him. It has taken what you gave it. What you gave it. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The forest had already claimed her, just as it had claimed Luke. Her love, her memories, her attachment to him, everything she held dear was now something the forest could consume, could feast on. Her breath caught in her throat. She could feel it, the forest's hunger, the pull of it, the desire to take everything she was, to turn her into one of its guardians, its lost souls. She thought of Luke, of the hollow shell of him that now roamed the cavern, trapped in an eternal state of torment. Could she do that to him? Could she leave him in this place, condemned to wander forever, just so she could save herself? But as the thoughts swirled in her mind, another, more desperate part of her screamed in defiance. No, she couldn't let it win. She couldn't become part of this place. She wouldn't. "I won't give it up," she whispered, the words barely leaving her lips. "I won't give up what I have left. I won't surrender him, or myself." The keeper's eyes narrowed, the faintest glimmer of something like disappointment crossing her face. "You do not understand, Claire. You think you can leave here unchanged? The forest will take from you what it needs. Whether you offer it freely or not, it will take it. The question is, what will it take from you? And what will you lose in return?" Claire's pulse quickened as she tried to steady herself. She was shaking now, the weight of her decision pressing down on her shoulders. The keeper's words echoed in her mind, and despite her best efforts to ignore them, Claire knew they held a terrible truth. If she didn't give the forest what it demanded, it would take something else. Something worse. The chamber grew colder, the shadows darker. Claire's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, for a way out of the tangled web the forest had spun around her. But there was nowhere to go, no way to run. She was trapped in this place, bound to its will, just like everyone before her. She turned back to the keeper, her voice trembling. "What if I fight? What if I refuse to give anything? What happens then?" The keeper's expression was unreadable, but there was a slight shift in her stance, a subtle shift that made Claire's breath catch. "The forest is not patient. It will take what it wants, whether you are ready or not. Those who resist become lost, consumed by the very thing they fear." Lost. The word echoed in Claire's mind, making her blood run cold. She could see it now. Luke's twisted form. The way he had been turned into something other, something unrecognizable. She thought of his eyes, those hollow, broken eyes, and she realized something. Luke wasn't the only one who could be consumed by the forest. If she didn't make a choice, if she didn't make a sacrifice, she would end up just like him. Lost. Forgotten. A part of this place forever. But what could she give? What was left? What could she sacrifice? Her mind flashed to her memories, the moments she had spent with Luke, the love they had shared, the life they had built together. All of it now tied to this place, this darkness. She had to let go of it. She had to free herself. She had to choose. The keeper's voice cut through her thoughts, low and insistent. "You must decide, Claire. The forest demands its price." And then, as if a wave had crashed over her, the truth became clear. The price wasn't just her memories. It wasn't just her love for Luke. The forest wanted her identity. It wanted her soul. Everything she was, everything she had ever been, was now a part of this twisted, eternal hunger. If she wanted to leave, she had to give herself up. She had to surrender everything. The past, the love, the pieces of herself that had made her human. And in return, the forest would let her go. It would let her walk away. But would she be the same? Would she even remember who she was? The fire before her flickered, its flames growing brighter, hotter, the light casting long, sharp shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. The chamber seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the forest, the air thick with the sound of its hunger. Claire's chest tightened, her pulse racing as she realized that time was running out. She had to make her choice now, or the forest would make it for her. The keeper's eyes glinted with anticipation, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles. "The time is almost here, Claire. You must decide. What will you give?" Claire's mind raced. She looked down at the ground, her fingers trembling as she gripped the stones beneath her. The firelight danced across her hands, and for a brief moment she imagined that she could feel the earth itself reaching out to claim her, to pull her into its depths. And then, with a breath that could have shattered the silence of the cavern, Claire made her choice. Claire's heart thundered in her chest, the beat heavy and uneven as she stood at the crossroads of her fate. The fire before her flickered and danced, its flames casting chaotic shadows on the stone walls, making the room pulse with an eerie energy. The keeper stood like an immovable statue, her presence a cold weight pressing down on Claire's very soul. The air in the chamber felt charged, thick with expectation, as if every second, every breath, was building to a singular, irrevocable moment. Claire's hands shook as they rested at her sides, her fingers curling and uncurling, the tremors running through her body like a virus. The forest's hunger whispered in the back of her mind, soft but persistent. She could feel its reach, like an invisible hand crawling across her skin, drawing closer, pulling her toward its center. The words of the keeper echoed in her mind, "You must decide, Claire. What will you give?" She looked at the keeper, at the figure who seemed both timeless and terrifying, standing in quiet anticipation of her choice. For a moment, Claire wondered if she was already lost, if the choice had already been made for her. The keeper's gaze was unreadable, as though she were watching Claire wrestle with a battle that had already been won long ago. "I can't," Claire whispered hoarsely, shaking her head, the words coming out before she could stop them. "I can't give it up. I can't let it go. I can't give you my memories. I can't give up Luke. I can't lose myself." The keeper's expression remained impassive, her pale eyes glinting faintly in the dim light of the fire. She did not speak, but there was something in the stillness that made Claire feel as though she were under a microscope. Her every thought, every hesitation, examined by something far older than her, far beyond her understanding. Claire took a step back, her mind spiraling with panic. This wasn't real. None of this was real. She couldn't be trapped like this, not forever. There had to be another way. There had to be something she could do. But the longer she stood there, the more the weight of the forest pressed down on her. It surrounded her, it whispered to her, its call growing stronger, louder with every passing second. Her feet felt heavy, like they were sinking into the stone beneath her, like the ground itself was pulling her into its depths. The keeper watched her with quiet patience, but Claire could feel her presence like a storm gathering, relentless, inescapable. The forest did not care about her fear. It did not care about her hesitation. It only cared for what it wanted, and it would take it, whether she was ready or not. She thought of Luke again, his broken, twisted form, his hollow eyes, empty and lost. The way his voice had been distorted, the desperation in his words as he had called out to her, begging for release, for help. Was he gone? Was he truly lost to her, to this place? Her stomach churned as the thought settled into her mind. The realization came with a sharp pang, a gut-wrenching clarity. Luke was gone. Not dead, but something worse. Something twisted by the forest, by the dark power that pulsed through the very roots of the trees. And if she didn't act now, if she didn't choose, she would follow the same path. She would become just another lost soul wandering these endless, twisted paths, forgotten by the world above. The thought was suffocating. The thought of losing everything, of losing herself. No, she couldn't do that. She wouldn't. The keeper's voice broke the silence, low and calm, like a gentle breeze. "The forest will take from you regardless, Claire. If you do not offer it willingly, it will take it from you. And you will not escape its grasp. You will not escape its hunger." Her words were like a prophecy. And Claire knew deep in her bones that if she didn't make a choice soon, it would be too late. There was no more running. No more bargaining. No more pretending this was anything but what it was. She had entered the forest. And the forest would never let her go. Tears welled up in Claire's eyes as she realized the truth. She could feel the forest's heartbeat now, faint and rhythmic, pulsing through the air, through her chest. It was alive. It was waiting. It had always been waiting. She stepped forward, her legs trembling beneath her, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The keeper's pale eyes followed her every movement, but Claire no longer felt the weight of her gaze. She was beyond that, beyond fear. She had to make the sacrifice. For a long moment, Claire stood in silence, her breath shaky, her heart racing. The fire crackled, the shadows on the walls stretching and contorting like the twisting branches of the trees outside, and it was then that the terrible, terrible truth hit her. She could not take her memories with her. She could not carry the burden of the love she had for Luke. The memories of their time together, of the way he had laughed and loved her, would never be hers again. The forest would claim them, would consume them until nothing of that love remained. It would twist them, erase them, leaving only emptiness in their place. She had to let go of him. She had to let go of the part of herself that clung to the past. It wasn't just Luke. It was everything. The life she had known. The life she had built. Her identity. It was all tied to the forest now, bound to its dark heart. And she had to free herself. With trembling hands, Claire closed her eyes. She thought of Luke, of their shared moments, their laughter, their quiet nights under the stars. She thought of his touch, his smile, his warmth, the love that had once been so real, so strong. And then, with an agonizing, wrenching sensation deep inside her chest, Claire made her decision. She opened her eyes and turned to face the keeper. I give it to you, she said, her voice cracking with the weight of the words. I give you my memories. I give you everything. For a moment there was silence. The keeper did not move. The fire crackled softly in the background, its light flickering weakly in the heavy stillness. And then, slowly, the keeper nodded as if accepting the inevitable. The forest thanks you, she whispered. In that instant, the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, swirling around Claire like a living thing, wrapping around her body, curling around her arms and legs, pulling her into its embrace. The coldness of the air intensified, and she could feel the forest's heartbeat now, echoing in her chest, matching the rhythm of her own pulse. Her mind began to fade, the edges of her thoughts growing blurry, like watercolors bleeding into one another. Her memories of Luke, of their life together, of the laughter and warmth, began to slip away like sand through her fingers. She tried to hold on, to remember, but the more she fought, the more it slipped from her grasp. The forest's hunger was relentless, and in the end there was nothing left to hold on to. The moment Claire's words left her lips, something in the air shifted. The cavern, once warm with the flickering firelight, grew cold, impossibly cold, as though the very essence of the room had been drained of its warmth. She could feel it, an emptiness that washed over her, a sensation like the air had thickened and was suffocating her. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps as the shadows pressed closer, creeping along her skin, curling around her arms and legs like tendrils of smoke. The keeper moved forward, her steps slow and deliberate, as though she were observing the unfolding transformation with a detached, almost clinical interest. She reached out, her hand hovering in the air before Claire, as though she could taste the shift in the room, the change in the very essence of Claire's being. Claire's mind reeled, the quiet whisper of no echoing faintly in her thoughts, but it was already too late. The forest had taken what it wanted, and her memories, the very threads of her identity, were slipping away. Her sense of self began to fade, slowly at first, as if someone were erasing the sharp details of a photograph with a soft brush, making her who she was feel less and less real. Her heart screamed his name, but his memory, his presence, was already slipping from her grasp. The more she tried to hold on to him, the more his image blurred, fading into a haze. Her breath caught in her throat, the sharp pang of loss twisting inside her chest like a knife. She couldn't hold on to him anymore. She couldn't hold on to anything. The fire flickered wildly, its flame rising higher, casting long, jagged shadows against the walls that seemed to pulse and stretch with the rhythm of Claire's fading heartbeat. It was as if the forest itself was feeding on the remnants of who she had been. The keeper watched, unblinking, her gaze never leaving Claire's face as the transformation unfolded. The wind in the cavern began to pick up, howling softly at first, but it grew louder, its eerie whispers creeping through the room like a living thing. Whispers in the trees, the forest seemed to murmur. Whispers of the lost. Claire's knees buckled, her body trembling as the weight of her surrender settled over her, the darkness in the room deepening. She could feel herself, her very essence, being pulled into something darker, deeper. Her mind was fraying, pieces of herself breaking away, slipping through her fingers like dust. She looked at the keeper, her vision blurring, and for a fleeting moment she saw something, someone, in the keeper's eyes. It was her. It was her, but it wasn't. It was as though she were looking at a shadow of herself, a reflection distorted and twisted by time. The keeper's eyes glinted with a knowing, ancient sorrow that pierced Claire's soul. "You have given what the forest wanted," the keeper said softly, her voice now carrying a strange, melodic quality, like an echo from another world. "You have given your essence, your love, your memories, and now you are free." Claire's head spun. The words felt wrong. They should have been a release, an answer, but instead they felt like the final nail in her coffin. Free. She wasn't free. She had given up everything. She was nothing but a hollow shell, a vessel for the forest's hunger, and the more she tried to grasp onto herself, the more she felt herself slipping away. But the keeper's voice was like a force, compelling her to listen. "Now you walk the path of the forgotten. You are no longer the person who entered this forest. You are something else. Something new. A guardian of the forest's will." The words landed like stones in her chest, each one sinking deeper into her soul, pressing her further into the abyss of her own loss. Guardian. Was that all she would ever be now? A keeper of the forest's darkness, a wraith walking among the trees, feeding its insatiable hunger? Her past, her love, her very self, it had all been consumed. Nothing would be left for her in the world she once knew. As her thoughts spiraled, Claire's senses began to dull, her mind growing numb. The sharp pain of loss, the anguish of what she had given up, faded into the background, as though the forest's power were slowly erasing the very sensation of grief. She couldn't remember when it had started, when she had stopped feeling like her. When the image of Luke had blurred into the distance, a fading memory that now seemed more like a dream than a real part of her life. The shadows surrounding her began to form shapes, moving, twisting in the firelight. She could no longer make out their individual forms, but she knew they were watching her, waiting for her to become one of them. waiting for her to lose her last shred of humanity and step fully into the embrace of the forest. The keeper stepped back, her face expressionless, yet there was something in her gaze that made Claire feel like an insect caught in a web, struggling against the inevitable. She spoke again, her voice soft, almost like a lullaby. "The forest will claim you now, Claire. You will walk the paths, keep the secrets, guard the land. You are no longer the person you once were. The past is gone. The memories are gone. All that is left is the forest and its endless hunger." Claire's mind struggled to focus on her words, but it felt like an impossible task. The darkness had taken root inside her, wrapped around her mind, pulling her into its fold. She could feel herself fading more with each passing second, the pull of the forest growing stronger, until there was nothing left but the hollow echo of who she had been. The forest's pulse, its heartbeat, thudded in the depths of her mind, resonating through her very bones. The fire crackled and hissed, its flames dancing like mocking shadows, and for the first time, Claire realized that she could no longer hear the sound of her own heartbeat. The keeper's voice came again, a whisper now, as though it were slipping from a dream. "You will no longer remember him. The forest will take your love, your grief, and turn it into something new. You will become the forest's guardian, and you will forget who you were. There is no escape from this fate. You will never leave this place again." The last of Claire's strength drained from her, the last shred of herself slipping into the darkness, and then, for the briefest of moments, she remembered. She remembered Luke. His face, his touch, the warmth of his smile, the way he had made her feel alive. But it was fleeting, like a star vanishing behind a cloud. The memory was slipping away, fading like a dying ember. The keeper's final words were the last thing Claire heard before everything went black. "Goodbye, Claire. You are part of the forest now." Claire awoke in darkness. There was no light, no warmth, only the coldness of stone beneath her and the hum of something ancient, something pulsing through the very air around her. For a moment she wasn't sure where she was, or who she was for that matter. The edges of her thoughts were frayed, like threads of a tattered tapestry, and she felt lost. But there was a sense of something else too, a presence, a weight in the air that seemed to press against her chest as if the forest itself were waiting, watching. Her pulse was faint, sluggish, and her breath came in shallow, disjointed gasps, as though she were still trying to wake from a long, dreamless sleep. She sat up slowly, her hands instinctively reaching out for something, anything, to anchor her, but her fingers brushed against cold, smooth stone. The ground beneath her was uneven, and as she pulled herself to her feet, she could hear the faint scrape of her shoes on the rock. The world around her was a void, but the emptiness wasn't silent. It was alive, a living quiet, filled with the whispers of the trees, the distant rustle of wind through leaves that shouldn't be there. Claire's thoughts swam. She couldn't remember how she'd gotten here or why she was here. There was only something that lingered at the back of her mind, a faint, distant echo. It was Luke, or it was his voice. But it was hollow now, just like the hollow feeling in her chest. His name was just a word. It didn't hold the same weight it once did. The pain of loss, the grief of what she had surrendered, felt distant, like a memory she was slowly forgetting. Her feet moved on their own accord, carrying her forward through the darkness, though she couldn't remember deciding to move. The forest had begun to whisper again, and now the whispers didn't just belong to the wind. They came from the trees themselves, from the ground, from the shadows that flickered just out of sight. This is it, she realized, though it barely felt like her thought. This is the beginning. Her legs moved of their own accord, as though they knew the path, though Claire had no memory of ever walking it before. The air around her was heavy, saturated with the pulse of the forest, the weight of its hunger. She could feel it, lurking beneath the surface of her thoughts, tugging at her consciousness, urging her forward, deeper into the heart of this place. As she walked, the shadows grew longer. The trees closed in around her, their twisted branches reaching down like gnarled fingers, their bark dark and slick, as though coated in something alive, something that pulsed with the beat of the forest's heart. The ground beneath her feet became softer, as though she were treading on moss and roots. The further she walked, the more she felt the forest's presence, a weight that pressed against her chest, drawing her in, guiding her forward. The deeper she went, the more she began to feel something stirring inside her. It wasn't quite a memory, and it wasn't quite a thought. It was more like a knowing. The forest had already claimed her. She was already a part of it, and she had become something else. Something new. She could feel it now. The pulse of the trees, the whisper of the wind, the watchful eyes in the darkness. Her breath grew slower, more measured, and her movements were becoming less hers, more automated, as if her body were being controlled by something older, something that knew the forest better than she ever could. Her eyes glazed over, and she found herself walking towards something, her mind too distant to question it, too far gone to resist. She walked until she came upon a clearing, though clearing was not the right word. This space in the forest felt unnatural, like a broken gap in the world where the very earth itself had been rearranged. There were no stars above, no sky, only the faint glow of the firelight that danced within the trees, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the ground. And there, in the center of the clearing, was a figure. At first, Claire wasn't sure what she was looking at. The figure was tall, cloaked in something dark, something that shimmered and seemed to change in the flickering light of the fire. The figure's face was obscured by a dark hood, its features hidden in shadow. But there was a presence there, a coldness, that reminded her of everything she had already lost. She stopped in her tracks, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sliver of something sharp in her chest, something that made her pause. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, as still and silent as the forest itself. The air around Claire thickened, the silence becoming unbearable. Her eyes traced the figure, and she felt a pull, a compulsion, to step closer. She didn't know why. She didn't know what it was, but the pull was strong, like an invisible thread drawing her in, winding tighter with each passing second. "You've come far," the figure said, its voice low, smooth, and haunting. It wasn't a sound she recognized, but it was oddly familiar, like the forest itself had spoken through its mouth. Claire's heart stuttered, her breath catching in her throat as the figure took a single step forward. "You have become one with the forest," it continued. Its voice was like the wind rustling through dead leaves, like whispers in the dark corners of her mind. "You will no longer remember the world you left behind. You will no longer remember yourself." Claire wanted to speak, wanted to ask who this was, what this was, but her voice was locked in her throat. Her chest ached with something, an emotion she couldn't name. Fear? Regret? The last fragments of her humanity? The figure moved again, its cloaked form gliding through the shadows with a grace that was almost unnatural. As it approached her, Claire instinctively stepped back. The figure stopped, raising a hand, its fingers long, unnaturally pale, toward her. She could feel its presence pressing against her, a weight that made her feel like she was being consumed by its gaze. "You will remember nothing," the figure said. Its words weren't an order, but a statement. "The past is dead. Your love is lost. You will never escape this place again." The words felt true, but they were also distant, like a memory she no longer understood. There was no denying the truth in them, but the fear, the hunger, that once surged through her was now just a hollow echo. "You belong to the forest now," the figure said softly, its voice like a sigh. "You belong to the trees, the shadows, the lost souls who walk these paths." Claire didn't respond. She couldn't. She had no voice, no identity to reclaim. There was nothing left but the forest, its silent watch, and the creeping pull that continued to draw her deeper into the dark heart of this place. And so, she stood there, no longer a person but something else. Something that belonged to the shadows, to the hunger, to the eternity of the forest. The figure turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the deep dark of the trees. Claire followed. She didn't know why, but she couldn't stop herself. Claire's feet carried her deeper into the forest, but her mind seemed to be floating on the edge of oblivion, unable to grasp hold of anything real. The trees around her were no longer just trees. They were watchers, standing tall and immovable, their gnarled branches twisting upward, stretching toward the unseen sky like fingers desperate for something, someone. The wind hummed through their leaves, but the sound wasn't soft or soothing. It was sharp, like the echo of an ancient warning, a reminder that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She didn't know how long she had been walking. Time had lost all meaning. The air had thickened, suffused with an almost tangible weight, as though the forest was pressing down on her from every direction, suffocating her, drawing her in. It wasn't cold, exactly, but the air was unnatural, as if it had been soaked in 1,000 lifetimes of regret, sorrow, and forgotten memories. It clung to her skin, making every breath feel heavier, like inhaling the past itself. She tried to focus, tried to remember. Who was she? What was she? But it felt as though her thoughts were melting, dissolving into the wind, into the forest. Her name, her memories, were already slipping away from her grasp, like water through her fingers. The harder she tried to hold on, the more the forest seemed to take from her. It was like fighting against the tide, the pull of it relentless, drowning out the person she used to be. The path she walked on was faint, barely more than a trail that had been worn into the earth by generations of forgotten souls. It twisted and turned, curving around trees that seemed to grow closer the farther she went. The ground beneath her feet became soft, spongy, like walking on wet moss. There was no light to guide her, only the flickering glow of distant, unnatural fireflies that drifted aimlessly in the thick air, casting long shadows that stretched and danced like ghosts. She heard footsteps behind her, soft and deliberate, and a strange sense of recognition bloomed in her chest. She didn't turn around at first, couldn't turn around, but the sound was impossible to ignore. Someone or something was walking with her, its presence unmistakable but not threatening. It felt like a part of the forest itself, a shadow, a silent watcher trailing just behind her. Then the voice came. "You're almost there, aren't you?" The words were soft, but they cut through the heavy silence around them. The voice was familiar but alien. It had the same haunting, otherworldly quality that the figure's voice had. "You've given so much already, Claire. What's left?" Her heart skipped a beat at the sound of her name, the sound of something that still remembered her. But it wasn't a memory she could cling to. It wasn't Luke. It wasn't anyone from her past. It was something that felt both distant and immediate, as though it had always been there, waiting for her. "What's left?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper, as though the very act of speaking might tear her apart. The forest responded, its answer written in the air. The trees shifted around her, their branches creaking like old bones, the ground beneath her feet groaning softly as if something deep within the earth were shifting, waking. A dark, slithering presence seemed to pulse in the air, wrapping around her body like a heavy cloak, pulling her forward. "You've already given what the forest wanted," the voice said again, this time more patient, as though it were explaining something simple. "But there's something more. There's always more. The forest never truly lets go. It never truly gives up what it takes. What's left is the part of you that was never meant to belong to the world. The part of you that came into being because of the forest, because of its hunger." Claire's legs trembled beneath her, and she tried to stop walking, to take a moment to breathe, but the path continued to pull her forward. The world around her seemed to shift, the trees leaning closer, their bark glistening like sweat, the ground now damp with something dark and rich. She wanted to stop. She wanted to scream, to fight against this force that was taking everything from her, but her voice wouldn't come. There was no fight left in her. No resistance. She was the forest now. Her mind drifted back to the clearing where she had met the cloaked figure, the watcher as she now thought of it. There had been something familiar about its presence, something that resonated deep within her chest, a pull that was both unnatural and inevitable. And now, walking deeper into the woods, she could feel that presence again, not in the form of the figure, but in the very air itself. The forest was watching her, waiting for her to take the final step. She could hear the whispers again, louder now. The rustling of the leaves seemed to carry words, phrases she couldn't quite make out. Every branch, every gust of wind, every crack in the earth seemed to be a part of the same voice, a voice that had been speaking to her since the moment she entered the forest. It was the forest itself, and it was drawing her in, telling her that she had already become it. But there was something else now, something darker, lurking just beneath the surface of the whispers. A sense of impending change. The forest wasn't done with her yet. It was never done. The path ahead seemed to narrow, the trees growing tighter, their branches arching overhead, closing off the sky. There was a feeling of finality in the air, as though the forest was preparing for something grand, something inevitable. The whispers grew louder, frantic now, and Claire could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind her once again. This time she didn't resist. She knew, somewhere deep down, that she couldn't. She had already made her choice when she entered this place. The forest had claimed her, consumed her, and now it was leading her to the final part of her transformation. The ground ahead of her opened up into another clearing, larger this time, but there was no light here. No fireflies. No soft hum of the trees. It was just darkness, a suffocating, oppressive blackness that seemed to swallow everything around it. There was no escape from it. It was everywhere. And standing in the middle of the clearing was the Watcher, its form now clearer, more defined. The cloak shimmered in the dark, and its face was still hidden, but its presence filled the clearing as if it had always been here, waiting for Claire to arrive. The whispers grew louder as she stepped forward, the trees pressing in from all sides, the air thick with the weight of anticipation. The Watcher extended a hand, and Claire instinctively reached for it. The moment their hands touched, the forest roared. It wasn't a sound of triumph, but a sound of ancient release. The trees trembled, the earth groaned, and Claire felt something shift inside her, something so profound, so deep, that it felt like her very essence was being torn apart. The Watcher's voice came again, this time not in words, but in a sensation that flooded Claire's mind. Now you are one of us. Now you remember nothing, but you will never forget what it means to be the forest's child. And with that, the darkness closed around her. The air was thick with the forest's presence, its whispers louder than ever before, like 1,000 voices chattering all at once, rising and falling in a frantic, hypnotic cadence. Claire's body felt detached from her mind as she stood there, her fingers still entwined with the watchers. The moment their skin had touched, it had felt like a current had surged through her, an electric pulse that reverberated deep within her bones. The forest was speaking through her now. The darkness was inside her, and she was inside it. She could feel it filling every corner of her being, like water flooding an empty vessel, drowning her with its weight, but also giving her life. The Watcher's presence was overwhelming. It towered above her, yet its form remained ever shifting, its edges blurred and impossible to define. It was as though it was made of the very essence of the forest, an entity as old as the trees themselves, as ancient as the soil beneath her feet. It did not need to speak again, for Claire could hear its voice in the very air she breathed. It was both a command and an invitation, a pull that could not be ignored. "You are reborn," the Watcher's voice, or perhaps the forest's voice, echoed in her mind. The words weren't spoken aloud, but were felt, like an unspoken truth that reverberated through her chest, shaking her very core. "You have given yourself to the forest. You have shed your past, your humanity, and embraced the hunger that resides in all things. You belong to the trees now." Claire's head swam. The words should have been a relief, a final release from the pain of her transformation, but they felt like a weight. Her mind struggled to grasp them, to understand them, but they eluded her. Belong to the trees? What did that even mean? She looked around, though she wasn't sure why. Perhaps some last desperate act of defiance, some fleeting moment of clarity before the forest swallowed her whole. But everything she saw only confirmed what she had already known. The clearing stretched infinitely in every direction, an endless void of darkness where the trees stood like silent sentinels. The soil was wet, slick with something that shimmered faintly in the dark, and it was alive. She could feel it beneath her feet, pulsing with the heartbeat of the forest itself. The Watcher stepped forward, moving with a fluid grace, like smoke swirling in the air. It was close now, its form materializing around her as if the darkness had shape and weight. Its presence surrounded her like a suffocating fog, its dark cloak rippling like the branches of a tree swaying in the wind. "You no longer need the memories of the world you left behind," it whispered softly. "Your past was a burden, something that held you back from your true calling. But now you are free. Free to embrace the forest's eternal rhythm. Free to walk the path of the forgotten." Claire didn't speak. She couldn't. Her voice felt as though it had been stripped from her. But inside her, there was something, a memory or perhaps just a feeling, that wanted to rise up. Something about Luke. Something about the love they had shared. She could feel it, a distant echo at the edges of her consciousness. But the more she tried to focus on it, the more it slipped away like trying to catch a shadow. "You are one of the guardians now," the Watcher continued. Its voice was both comforting and terrifying at once. "You will watch over the forest. You will guide the lost souls that wander these paths. You will protect the trees, and in turn, the forest will protect you." The words pierced through her, not with pain, but with a profound sense of finality. She was a guardian now. A part of the forest, not a person anymore. The identity she had clung to, Claire, was already fading into nothingness, and in its place, something else was rising. A new form of existence, one that belonged to the dark, to the eternal cycle of the forest's will. A shiver ran through her. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but something far deeper. A sense of loss, of irrevocable change that had taken root inside her. And yet, there was something else beneath it all, something that could not be silenced. A flicker of resistance buried deep within her. A whisper of humanity that refused to die, that screamed in the quietest part of her mind, "I am not like this. I'm not like them." But the forest was relentless. The Watcher's hand reached toward her again, this time touching the side of her face, its fingers cold, as though they were made of the very stone of the earth itself. And when the touch came, something in Claire broke, like the final fracture in glass. The Watcher spoke once more, but this time, its voice had changed. It was no longer the calm whisper she had heard before. It was darker, more urgent, filled with the weight of ancient power. "The last remnants of who you were are slipping away." The words were not a question, but a statement. "The forest takes all, and in return it gives you the strength to protect it. You will no longer feel pain. You will no longer feel the loss. The hunger will be yours to command." Claire's breath hitched. The hunger. She remembered the word now, remembered the gnawing emptiness that had followed her into the forest, the sense of something missing, something she had lost but couldn't quite recall. But now the hunger wasn't a void. It wasn't something to fear. It was a force to wield, to feed, and it was a part of her. The realization settled over her like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. The watcher stepped back, allowing Claire a moment of solitude in the center of the clearing, the darkness pressing in all around her. Her body felt different now, as though the very air had entered her blood, as though the forest had seeped into her veins. The hunger was no longer something external. It was part of her, twisting inside her like a living thing, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would never be the same. She lifted her head, her eyes searching the dark, the shadows between the trees, the faint whispers of the forgotten souls who wandered these cursed paths. The forest had claimed her, but it had also given her something else. Power. Power to protect the forest. Power to guard its secrets, its hunger, its eternity. Her pulse quickened, and for the first time since she had arrived in this place, she felt a strange clarity, a purpose. I am one of them, she thought, the words taking root deep within her. I am one with the forest now, and I will never be alone again. The watcher was gone. The darkness stretched before her, the trees beckoning her forward. Claire stepped into it without hesitation, her every movement a silent surrender to the forest's will. And as she walked, she felt the hunger grow inside her, alive and waiting for its next feast. Claire's footsteps echoed softly in the darkness, the soft crunch of the forest floor beneath her feet the only sound in the heavy silence. It felt like an eternity had passed since the watcher's presence had disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone with the weight of the forest's power. The air around her was thick with life and death. The trees, once distant and silent, now seemed alive with energy, their gnarled branches twisting like tendrils of an ancient creature. The very earth beneath her seemed to hum with the forest's pulse, as if the land itself was breathing, alive with an eternal hunger. Her hands, once trembling and unsure, now felt steady, sure of their purpose. Her skin, pale and cold like the bark of the trees, seemed to merge with the darkness, becoming one with the forest that surrounded her. The hunger inside her, once a gnawing emptiness, now thrummed in her veins like a living force, constantly urging her forward, urging her to feed, to protect, to claim. She could feel the pulse of it deep within her chest, beating in rhythm with the earth's own heartbeat. She was no longer Claire. That name had slipped away with the last remnants of her humanity, vanishing into the void of the forest. But there was something now, something that had taken its place. A new identity, one forged from the darkness that had swallowed her. The hunger that surged through her veins wasn't a thing to be feared. It was a part of her, as natural as the air she breathed. It was power. But the power came with a cost. As she walked deeper into the forest, her senses sharpened. Every movement of the wind, every rustle of the leaves, every whisper that passed through the trees, it all registered in her mind. She was attuned to it now. She could feel the forest calling to her, urging her to listen, to understand. There was a rhythm to it now, a pulse that beat through the very soil, and she was part of it. She had become a guardian, a protector of the forest's will, an eternal sentinel who watched over the lost souls that wandered these paths. She could sense them now, them, the ones who had been claimed by the forest before her, the ones who had fallen to its hunger. Their voices whispered on the wind, their forms just out of sight, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the forest to claim them fully. But there was more. There was something else, something new, something she hadn't anticipated. As she walked, she could feel the faint stirrings of others, the ones who had entered the forest after her, the ones who had not yet given up their humanity. They were out there, somewhere in the dark, and they were fighting it, resisting just as she had once done. The hunger within her pulsed with anticipation. It was a call, a lure, urging them to surrender, to let go of their last bits of themselves and become part of the forest. But she was not here to save them. No, she was a guardian now. Her duty was clear. She was here to guide them to the forest's embrace, where they would become one with the trees, the shadows, the eternal hunger. Her footsteps grew more deliberate as she moved through the forest, each step bringing her closer to the place where the lost souls wandered, where they too would feel the call, the pull of the forest. She could feel the ache of it now, a dark need stirring within her that mirrored the hunger in the land. It wasn't a question of whether they would fall to the forest's will. It was only a matter of when. Ahead, a dim light flickered, a faint, soft glow in the distance, like a distant star in the dark sky. Claire's heart, if she could still call it that, thudded with a strange excitement. She could feel it now, the pull, the undeniable urge to move toward it, to step into the light. It was as though the forest itself had chosen this moment, this sacrifice. The light grew stronger, brighter, until Claire could see the source of it. A figure standing alone in the center of a small clearing, bathed in the eerie, unnatural glow of the fireflies that danced around it. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, its face hidden by a hood, much like the Watchers. But there was something different about this one. This one felt familiar. And yet it wasn't. It was as if the very air around it hummed with expectation, a sense of destiny waiting to unfold. Claire stepped into the clearing, her gaze fixed on the figure. The moment she did, the figure turned toward her, its face still hidden beneath the cloak, but its presence was undeniable. There was something in its posture, in the way it stood, that sent a ripple of recognition through her. This was no ordinary soul wandering the forest. This was someone who had been marked, someone whose soul had already begun the transformation. "You've come," the figure said, its voice low and rasping, but there was something powerful in it. It was the voice of someone who had embraced the forest, who had given in to the hunger just as she had. "I knew you would. The forest calls to all of us. It waits for us to come to it." Claire stood still, her heart, or whatever remained of it, pounding in her chest. She could feel the hunger inside her stir, as if sensing a new presence, a new energy to feed upon. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The figure was a soul on the edge, a soul caught between resisting and surrendering to the forest's will. Without a word, the figure began to walk toward her, its steps slow and deliberate as though it knew what was coming. Claire's hunger grew stronger with every step it took, her body moving almost involuntarily, her arms outstretched, her fingers trembling with the anticipation of what was to come. As the figure came closer, it raised its head, and Claire saw the eyes beneath the hood, eyes that shimmered with the same cold emptiness that had once filled her own. It was a reflection of herself, a mirror of what she had become. The figure's gaze met hers, and for a moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were both lost to the forest, both claimed by the same hunger, the same fate. They were one now. And then, without another word, the figure reached out, its hand brushing Claire's cheek. And in that moment, as their skin touched, the forest roared, its hunger rising, its voice filling the air like 100,000 voices calling to them, urging them to surrender, to become one with it. The transformation was immediate, overwhelming. Claire's senses were flooded with the force of the forest's power. She could feel the earth beneath her, the roots of the trees stretching deep into the soil, pulling at her, anchoring her to the land. She could feel the souls of the lost ones, their whispers swirling around her like 1,000 winds. She could feel her own identity slipping away, dissolving into the very fabric of the forest itself. And then, in that moment, she understood. This was her purpose. This was her calling. She was the guardian of the forest's hunger. And now she would guide the lost souls just as she had been guided. She would lead them into the darkness, into the eternal embrace of the forest, where they would never be alone again. The figure before her smiled, a knowing, silent smile. And together they turned, stepping into the shadows, leaving the clearing behind. The hunger would never stop, and neither would they. The forest was alive, and it was vast, stretching endlessly in all directions. Claire could feel it in her bones now, the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the sway of the trees overhead, the whispers of the wind that carried with it the echoes of the forgotten. She had become one with it, part of its eternal rhythm. Her existence was no longer separate from it. She was the forest, and the forest was her. It was a strange, unsettling peace. The hunger, that gnawing emptiness that had once threatened to consume her, was now a part of her very being, and she no longer feared it. She fed it. She knew the forest's needs, the trees' needs, the creatures of the dark needs. Every path that wound through the endless wood, every shadow that stretched long across the ground, it all called to her, whispered to her, guiding her to where she was needed. She had become its protector, its eternal watchful eye. The lost souls, the ones who wandered into the forest seeking refuge, seeking answers, they were drawn to her now like moths to a flame. Some resisted, like she had once done, fighting against the pull, the call of the hunger. But it didn't matter. They would give in. The forest's power was inevitable, and it would find a way to consume all who entered. It was not a question of if, but of when. The wind picked up, swirling around her, tugging at her cloak like an old friend. The trees whispered her name, calling to her to join them in their ancient dance. But Claire, the guardian now, did not move. She stood still, her eyes focused on the horizon ahead, where the forest stretched endlessly, the dark expanse of it almost impossible to comprehend. There was a stirring in the distance. A soul. The feeling came to her as it always did, a deep, visceral sensation in the pit of her stomach, like an unspoken understanding. She could feel it, the faint trace of a soul that had crossed the border of the forest. The hunger began to pulse within her, a deep, aching throb, rising up from her chest, spreading out into every fiber of her being. The call was unmistakable. There was a pause, a quiet moment where time seemed to slow, and then, from the dense thicket ahead, a figure emerged, staggering into the clearing. It was a man, his face pale, his clothes torn, his eyes wide with terror. He had wandered too far, lost in the forest labyrinth, and now he was here, standing before her, unsure of what to do. He didn't see her at first. His eyes darted back and forth, as though he were searching for an escape, some way out of the nightmare that had swallowed him whole. But Claire knew. She knew that escape was a lie. The forest had no exit. She stepped forward, her boots making no sound against the wet earth. She was the silence of the forest now, the stillness. Her movement was slow, deliberate, but there was no mistaking the purpose in it. The man froze, his body tense, as though he could sense the presence of something far older, far darker, than his mind could comprehend. "Please?" His voice cracked, raw with fear. "I didn't mean to. Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wander into this place. Please let me go." Claire's hand rose, but it wasn't a gesture of mercy. It was a gesture of command. The hunger surged within her, and she could feel the pull of the forest intensify, the dark energy twisting in the air around them. The trees seemed to lean in, watching, waiting. The forest was patient, but its hunger was insatiable. She said nothing. There was no need for words. The forest had its own language, and she had learned it long ago. She was its voice now. The man looked at her then, his eyes wide with a dawning realization. He could see her now, fully, really see her, and in that instant the terror in his eyes shifted. He understood. His breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled backward, his hands raised defensively as though trying to ward off some invisible force. "No, no, please." His voice was a plea, broken, desperate. "I don't want to die. Please, please don't let the forest take me." But Claire didn't move. She didn't have to. The forest had already claimed him. The man fell to his knees, his face contorted in anguish, his hands clutching at the soil as if trying to dig himself free. But it was no use. The earth would not release him. The roots would not let him go. The forest had already made its choice. Claire watched, detached, her gaze cold, as the man's cries became more frantic, his struggles more desperate. She could feel the pull of the forest in him, the way the hunger licked at his soul, urging him to surrender. The whispers around them grew louder, like the sound of distant thunder, the sound of a storm that was already raging just out of sight. "Please, help me." But Claire's eyes remained fixed on him. She felt nothing for his pleas, his fear, his desperation. The forest did not care for such things. It did not care for the broken and the lost. It only cared for one thing, the hunger. And once it had begun, there was no turning back. The man's body jerked as if struck by an invisible force. The ground around him seemed to shift, the roots of the trees rising up from the earth like snakes, coiling around his legs, pulling him into the soil. His scream echoed through the forest, a desperate, broken sound that reverberated against the trees. But it was futile. The forest was already taking him, claiming him as it had claimed so many before. His body stiffened, the struggle fading as the life was drained from him. His hands grasped at the soil one last time, and then, with a final shuddering breath, he went still. The whispers in the trees hushed, the air settling back into its quiet rhythm. The forest had consumed another soul, another piece of itself added to the ever-growing mass of its hunger. Claire stood there for a moment longer, her eyes fixed on the place where the man had fallen, where the earth had swallowed him whole. She didn't feel pity. She didn't feel sorrow. She felt nothing. She was the forest now, and it was her duty to guide the lost souls to their end. She was no longer Claire. She was something far older, far darker. She was the hollow echo of the forest's endless hunger. The wind shifted, carrying with it a new scent, another soul, another lost traveler. The hunger stirred inside her again, and Claire felt it rising within her. She turned away, her cloak swirling around her like a shadow, and began to walk. The forest was calling again, pulling her deeper into its heart, where the next soul awaited. And with each step she took, she knew one thing: there would always be more. The forest would never stop. The hunger would never cease. And neither would she. The forest stretched endlessly ahead, a vast, impenetrable web of shadows and whispers. Claire's feet moved with purpose, but her mind, what remained of it, was distant, lost in the swirling currents of hunger and eternal darkness that now governed her every step. The hunger was always there, deep within her chest, gnawing at her very soul. It was a constant companion, a presence that defined her. She had long since ceased to question it. The forest had chosen her. She had chosen the forest. There was no turning back. And yet, there were moments when the hunger wasn't enough. When she could hear the whispers of those who had walked the path before her, the lost souls that had been swallowed by the forest's dark embrace. They were not dead, not entirely. They lingered in the trees, in the roots, in the very air that Claire breathed. They whispered of a time before, of a world beyond the forest's reach, and for a brief moment, Claire could almost remember what it had been like to be human. But then, just as quickly as the thought came, it was gone. The hunger always returned to claim her mind, to drag her back into the present, into the forest's embrace. The trees around her were silent now, their branches heavy with the weight of 1,000 secrets. Their leaves fluttered faintly in the wind, but there was no rustle, no movement beyond that. It was as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. And then she heard it. A soft, haunting sound. A cry. It was faint at first, barely more than a murmur on the wind, but Claire's senses, sharpened by her transformation, could pick out the sound with ease. It was the sound of someone in pain, someone lost, someone who was about to join the endless cycle of souls that the forest claimed. The hunger stirred within her, but this time, there was something more. There was something different about this cry. She turned, her eyes scanning the trees, her mind already anticipating the soul that awaited her. The call was growing louder now, more distinct, and with it came a sense of urgency, a desperation that she couldn't ignore. It was pulling her forward, leading her deeper into the heart of the forest, into the shadowy depths where the trees grew closer together, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their roots like ancient fingers clawing at the earth. And then she saw it. A figure, slumped against a tree, her body trembling with silent sobs. Her face was hidden in her hands, her long dark hair falling over her shoulders like a curtain. She was hunched over, her breath ragged, as though the very weight of the forest had crushed her. Her clothes were torn, her skin scratched and bruised from the thorns and brambles that had clawed at her as she wandered aimlessly through the woods. Claire's gaze softened for just a moment as she stepped closer. There was something familiar about the woman's posture, the way she clung to herself as if holding on to some last thread of sanity. She had been through the same thing once, hadn't she? She had been the one lost in the forest, broken, desperate, trying to find a way out. The hunger inside her flared, but for a fleeting moment she felt something else. A brief, distant echo of the humanity that she had lost. The woman's sobs grew louder, more frantic, and Claire could hear the tremor in her voice as she whispered through her tears. "Please, please, someone help me." The words were haunting, full of a fear that Claire could remember all too well. She had felt the same way once, hadn't she? Trapped, helpless, lost in the never-ending maze of trees. She had cried out for help, begged for someone to save her. But no one had answered. The forest had taken her, as it had taken so many others. Now Claire was the one who answered the call. She approached the woman slowly, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of moss that covered the forest floor. The woman looked up, her tear-streaked face wide with a mix of hope and terror. She gasped, as if seeing Claire for the first time, and her eyes locked onto Claire's with a sense of recognition, of understanding. But there was something else, something darker in the woman's gaze. It was as if she could sense the change in Claire, the way the forest had taken root in her, the hunger that burned beneath her skin. Who are you?" the woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the forest. What are you?" Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. The forest had already spoken for her. She could feel it now, the hunger pulling at the woman's soul, tugging at her heart like 1,000 invisible threads. The forest was calling to her, urging her to join it, to surrender, just as Claire had. The woman's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, Claire saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes. She knew what was happening. She knew she had been claimed. The hunger surged within Claire, growing stronger, more insistent. The forest demanded its due, and Claire knew what she had to do. "Please, no," the woman whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't want to become like you." But Claire's eyes remained cold, her gaze unyielding. She had once begged for mercy, but the forest had shown her none. Now she was the forest's instrument, its hand reaching out to claim the lost and the broken. She was its guardian, and it was her duty to bring the souls to their end. "You don't have a choice," Claire said softly, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. The forest has already chosen you." With those words, the woman's body went rigid, her hands gripping the tree trunk in an attempt to steady herself. The hunger within Claire flared again, and this time she felt the roots of the forest begin to stir. The trees around them groaned, their branches creaking as if alive, the dark soil shifting beneath the woman's feet. The hunger called to her, demanded that she surrender. And in the end she did. The woman's sobs faded, and her body collapsed into the earth, swallowed by the roots of the trees that had waited so long for her. Her cries echoed through the forest for just a moment before falling silent. Claire stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the spot where the woman had been. The forest's whispers returned, louder now, more insistent, as if urging her forward, pushing her to continue her endless journey. For a moment, Claire thought she could hear something else. A voice, distant but familiar. The hunger flared inside her again, drowning out the memory, drowning out the last remnants of who she had been. The forest was all that remained. The hunger was all that mattered. And with that, she turned and walked deeper into the woods, her footsteps echoing through the silence as the trees closed in around her. Another soul had been claimed. Another piece of the forest's endless hunger had been fed, and Claire would never be the same again. The forest was darker now, as if it had absorbed the final breath of the woman who had fallen before it. The air hung heavy with an unspoken stillness, a lull between the hunger and the unending drive of the woods. Claire stood motionless, her mind lost in the endless dance of shadows, the lingering sense of the woman's soul now woven into the very fabric of the earth. The forest was patient. It always waited. It had time. And so did she. Her gaze lingered on the spot where the woman had been consumed, the forest floor now smooth, untouched by the struggle that had come before. The roots had reclaimed her as they had reclaimed so many before. In the end it was all the same. The hunger always won. The forest always claimed. The haunting sense of déjà vu had become familiar. Claire had witnessed this scene countless times now, souls lost, desperate, pleading for mercy. And she had always answered, just as the forest had demanded. The guilt that once threatened to drown her, the question of whether she was still human or merely a shadow of what she had been, it had long since faded, buried beneath layers of the hunger, of the forest's influence. But somewhere deep in the back of her mind, there were moments, flickers of something long forgotten. Moments when the hunger would soften just enough to let through the faintest whisper. Was there more to you than this? The wind stirred through the trees again, sending a chill through the air. It was a voice on the wind, the softest of murmurs that Claire could barely catch. It was calling her, guiding her through the forest, pulling her back towards something. She could feel it. It was subtle but insistent. She wasn't sure why she responded. There was nothing left for her out here in the forest except the endless cycle of feeding, of watching the lost wander through the thicket, only to be claimed. Yet, in the distance there was something else, something calling her deeper into the woods. The hunger urged her to move, but something else urged her to listen. The shadows twisted as she walked, the trees becoming closer, more oppressive. She could feel the ancient weight of the forest pressing in around her, but she was undeterred. The sound of her footsteps was drowned out by the rustling of the leaves, the wind sighing through the branches. The air tasted like earth, thick with the scent of damp wood and the decay of centuries. And then, through the thickening veil of shadows, Claire saw it. A clearing. Smaller than the others but distinct. A patch of wild, vibrant green amidst the deathly stillness of the forest. It was a strange contrast to the blackened trees that surrounded it. This clearing was alive, bursting with flowers that had long since stopped blooming in the rest of the forest, as though they had been spared from the forest's constant hunger. In the center of the clearing there was a stone that was unlike the others in the forest. Smooth, almost polished, with ancient runes etched into its surface. Claire approached it, the air around her growing colder as she drew near. She ran her fingers along the stone, the markings strange yet familiar, as if they had once been a part of her life, a part of her past. She had seen these symbols before. She knew them. But how? For the first time in what felt like ages, a flicker of memory surfaced. A flash of a place, the lodge, a place beyond the forest, a place where the air wasn't so thick, where the trees didn't whisper, where the wind didn't pull at her soul. It had been home. Home. The thought slipped away as soon as it had come, but the sensation remained. Claire's hand trembled on the stone. For a moment, it felt like something was calling to her from deep within the stone, pulling at the very core of her being. A voice from long ago, a voice that felt like it was hers but wasn't hers. She pulled her hand back as though burned, and the hunger inside her surged, an overwhelming instinctual need to feed, to forget again. The voice on the wind seemed to grow louder, more insistent, urging her to move away from this stone, to leave the clearing behind and return to the path of eternal hunger. But Claire stood frozen. The forest was calling her to do its bidding. But this stone, this place, it felt different. It felt like a door to something else, something far beyond the trees and the roots. A memory not yet fully lost. The wind howled through the branches, the trees groaning as the hunger stirred within them. Claire could feel the weight of their ancient gaze on her. The pressure of the forest will urging her to leave the stone behind and return to the task she was made for. And yet, despite the forest's hunger, despite the pull of the dark shadows that waited just beyond the trees, Claire couldn't shake the sense that this place held something more. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet shifted. A crack appeared in the earth, splitting the moss-covered ground open in front of her. Her breath caught in her throat as the crack widened, revealing someone beneath the earth. A hand, pale and reaching, pushing upward from the darkness below. Claire stepped back, her heart racing, but the hand reached higher, stretching toward her, grasping at the air as though it were alive, desperate to break free. The air around her grew thick, almost suffocating, as the hand began to pull itself from the earth, its fingers thin and spindly, its skin translucent, as though it had been buried for centuries. And then, with a final desperate pull, the hand grasped the edge of the stone, and a figure emerged from the earth, twisted and broken, its body skeletal, its eyes wide and empty, staring at her with a haunting, familiar gaze. It was a man. A man Claire had seen before. Her heart stopped. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The world around her blurred, and the only thing she could focus on was the figure that stood before her, half buried in the earth, his face twisted in a grimace of pain and recognition. His mouth moved, but the words were silent, carried away by the wind. He reached out a hand toward her, his fingers gnarled and decayed, the skin stretching over the bones in grotesque, unnatural ways. And then the words came. Claire. His voice was a whisper, barely audible over the howling wind. But it was him. It was Luke. The hunger inside Claire flared. The forest urged her forward, 1,000 whispers urging her to claim him, to pull him into the darkness, to feed. But Claire stood frozen, her breath catching in her chest, her eyes locked onto his. The man she had once known, Luke, had returned, but he was not the man she had loved. He was something else, something twisted. The forest had claimed him. The forest had taken him from her. And now it was her turn to decide. Would she let the hunger consume him? Or would she allow him to slip from her grasp, to return to the place she had left behind, the place that had once been home? She didn't know. But as the wind howled through the trees, the answer became clear. She stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached out for him. The hunger stirred inside her. And this time it felt like it was tearing her apart. The clearing was eerily quiet. The wind had stilled, and the trees, once whispering with the forest's hunger, now seemed to stand silent, waiting. The stone at Claire's feet seemed to pulse, its ancient markings glowing faintly in the dim light of the shadowed forest. And in front of her, Luke, the man she had once loved, stood half buried, his skeletal form reaching toward her. His eyes were hollow, but they were his. The recognition, the sorrow, the pain, they were there even though he was no longer the man she had known. Her chest tightened at the sound of his voice, a whisper carried on the wind, the last echo of the man she had lost. For a brief moment, Claire felt something stir within her, a flutter like a butterfly's wings in the hollow of her chest. A longing, an ache. It was the last remnant of who she used to be, buried deep beneath the weight of the hunger and the forest's endless pull. But it was enough, just enough to make her falter. Her hand reached out, trembling toward him. The hunger raged within her, clawing at her insides, urging her to feed, to consume, to pull him into the soil where the forest could claim him completely. The whispers of the trees rose once again, louder this time, like the collective voices of 1,000 lost souls urging her to give in to the forest's will. He is no longer yours, the forest seemed to say. He is ours now. But as her fingers hovered over his decayed hand, Claire's heart, a heart she thought long dead, pounded. No, he wasn't just another soul to be consumed. He couldn't be. The wind picked up again, howling through the branches of the trees, and Luke's form jerked upward. The moment he moved, Claire flinched, stepping back instinctively, her heart racing. His face, though contorted by death, seemed to be alive with recognition. His eyes were wide, though clouded, filled with something she couldn't quite read. But his lips, twisted, cracked, and drawn tight, moved again, this time forming words she could almost hear. Claire, help me. The words sliced through the forest's hum like a knife. They were faint, but they carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken emotions. A cry for help. A plea for the woman he had once known. The woman she had once been. She stepped forward, her hand trembling. Her fingers brushed his for the briefest of moments, sending a shockwave through her chest. He was real. This wasn't just another illusion of the forest. He wasn't a figment of her past. But still he was changed. The rot of the forest had claimed him, had turned him into something unrecognizable. His skin was stretched thin like parchment, his bones barely contained beneath a thin veil of decayed flesh. He was the forest now, just like her. The hunger flowed through him just as it flowed through her, making him something she no longer understood. "I can't," Claire whispered to herself, her voice thick with emotion, barely able to speak as the weight of what she was witnessing settled in. Her chest tightened again. She wanted to help him, to pull him from this hell, to bring him back to the world that they had once shared. But there was no way out now. Not for him. Not for her. Luke's outstretched hand dropped suddenly, his fingers curling into a fist at his side. His gaze shifted from hers, and for the first time, Claire saw something in his eyes. A flicker of awareness, a flicker of what he once was. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped, his voice cracking like dry leaves in the wind. His words were clear now, as if something inside him had finally broken through the haze of the forest's hold. The forest, it doesn't let go. Not once it's claimed you. Not even for me. His voice was raw, a bitter echo of what it used to be, but Claire could feel the truth in his words. The forest didn't let go. It took. It consumed. There was no escaping it. Not for him. Not for her. Not for anyone who wandered too far into its depths. "I never wanted this for you," Claire whispered, her voice cracking as she took another step forward. She was close enough now to touch him, to feel the coldness of his skin, but she couldn't. The hunger flared within her again, stronger now, as though the forest itself was pulling at her, urging her to let go of the past. The world around her darkened. The shadows of the trees seemed to grow taller, leaning closer, watching her, waiting. The whispers became louder, more frantic. The hunger roared through her, drowning out everything but the desire to claim, to feed, to consume. But the flicker of Luke's gaze stopped her. For a moment, everything else faded, and all that was left was the man standing before her, no longer human, but still, in some twisted way, Luke. "You're not the woman I knew anymore," he whispered, his voice fading into the wind. "But you don't have to stay like this. You don't have to be the forest puppet. You still have a choice." The words hit Claire like a cold wave, crashing against the fortress of her mind, but they didn't last. His words were no longer his, not entirely. They were a reflection of something deeper, something buried beneath the forest's roots, trying to break through. The hunger surged within her again, the forest tightening its grip on her, pulling her away from him, from her last connection to the world she once knew. The trees groaned, their branches reaching down toward the ground like hungry fingers, and Claire took a step back. The hunger roared louder now, drowning out everything but the darkness, the insatiable desire to take what was in front of her. Luke's form began to flicker, his body dissolving like mist, the edges of his figure blurring as if the forest were unwilling to let him remain. His face twisted, a mix of sadness and acceptance, as if he knew this was the end of the road for both of them. "I'll be waiting," his voice echoed in the wind, distant, fading. And just like that, he was gone. The forest had claimed him fully. The shadows closed in around Claire, and she was left standing alone in the clearing. But the echoes of his voice, the memory of what they once shared, lingered in the air, mingling with the whispers of the trees. The hunger inside her roared, insistent and unyielding. She had been chosen, there was no way out now. She was the forest's guardian, the keeper of its hunger. But in that fleeting moment, as the echoes of Luke's words faded into the wind, she remembered the woman she once was. The one who had loved him. The one who had dreamed of a life beyond the trees. And for a single, terrifying heartbeat, she wondered, was there any part of her still capable of love? The answer was lost beneath the hunger, buried deep within the roots of the forest. But still, a flicker of doubt remained. The clearing was silent again. The wind had stilled, the trees had ceased their groaning, and the ground beneath Claire's feet felt unnervingly still. Her breath, ragged and uneven, was the only sound that pierced the heavy silence. The taste of the forest was thick in her mouth, like soil and rot, as the hunger gnawed at her insides. But beneath it, deep in her chest, something else, a flutter, a faint stirring, remained. Luke's words echoed in her mind, distant but undeniable. "You still have a choice." Claire shook her head, her eyes wide, but the whispers of the forest rose to drown out the memory. The hunger, it was the only choice. The forest had claimed her, it had molded her, shaped her into something new. She was a part of the forest now. The roots of the trees, the pull of the earth, the ache of the hunger, these were all she knew. And yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she hesitated. The forest had given her purpose. It had taught her the way of the hunger, the way of the guardian. It had claimed her when she was lost, had wrapped its arms around her like a mother, its roots sinking deep into her skin, binding her to its will. The desire to feed, to pull the lost souls into its dark embrace, had been her only focus for so long. It had consumed her thoughts, her very being. But Luke had made her question it. His voice, his presence, had broken through the forest's walls, if only for a moment, reminding her of a time before the hunger, of a time when she had felt something else. Was there any part of her left? Her fingers twitched, and without thinking, she turned and looked back toward the stone, the one that had drawn her into the clearing in the first place. The runes still glowed faintly, their ancient symbols etched into the surface as if alive. A pull deep inside her chest urged her to return to it, to reach out and touch it again. Perhaps there was something more there, something that could unlock the door to her past, to the woman she used to be. But the forest was watching. The roots of the trees beneath her feet twitched as if alive, curling around the ground, pulling at the very earth, drawing her back toward the hunger. Claire felt the pull in her bones, the need to surrender to it. The forest had given her everything: power, purpose, eternity. It had swallowed the last remnants of her humanity and remade her into something new. Something that could no longer feel the warmth of the sun or the cool breath of the wind. Something that thrived only in the shadows, in the dark embrace of the trees. But Luke's face haunted her still. His eyes, clouded by death but filled with something familiar, had been a reminder that there was something more than the hunger. There had been something in the way he had spoken to her, something that reached across the void, something that reached for her soul. A sudden sharp pain twisted in Claire's chest, like a raw, jagged wound, and she gasped, clutching at her heart. The hunger surged within her, stronger now, as though it could sense the conflict within her, the faint flicker of doubt. The wind stirred again, but this time, it wasn't the usual whisper of the forest. It was something else, a voice, faint but unmistakable, carried on the breeze. "Claire." She froze. The voice was soft but unmistakably familiar. She turned slowly, searching the shadows that surrounded her, but saw nothing. The clearing was empty. The trees stood still, their branches silent. And yet, the voice continued. "You can still remember. You can still choose." It was him again. The voice, faint and distant, was still there, Luke. His voice carried on the wind, a whisper, but the weight of it hung heavy in the air. She took a trembling step forward, her heart racing in her chest. She had to find the source. She had to know what it meant, what the voice wanted. For the first time in ages, she felt something, a flutter of hope, of life, of the possibility that she could still choose. The hunger inside her pulled at her again, stronger this time, insistent, demanding that she step back into the shadows, to return to the forest's embrace where everything was easy, everything was clear. The souls were lost, the feeding was endless, and the hunger would never stop. But Luke's voice was a tether, fragile yet unbreakable, pulling at her heart. It was the echo of a past life, a memory she had fought so hard to forget. "You can still remember," his words repeated in her mind, softer now but just as powerful. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness overcame her. She stumbled, her vision blurring, and for a brief moment she felt herself slipping back into the hunger, slipping back into the embrace of the forest that had claimed her, mind and soul. She could feel the roots beneath her feet, the earth shifting around her, pulling her toward the center of the forest. She could feel the weight of eternity pressing down on her. It was all she had known, all she had become. And yet, Luke's voice was still there. "You can still choose, Claire. You can still fight." She closed her eyes, trembling, feeling the full force of the forest's pull, its hunger, its endless grasp. The voices of the lost souls surrounded her, a chorus of whispers rising like an ocean, pulling at her, demanding her attention, reminding her of the power she had gained. But she was more than that. Her hand reached out, fingers brushing against the stone once more. The runes glowed brightly as if recognizing her touch, and a surge of energy passed through her, strong, overwhelming, but not dark. It was light. It was warmth. It was a flicker of something she had lost. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just the hunger. This was choice. She took a deep breath, the air thick in her lungs, and with a final, defiant movement, she pulled her hand away from the stone. The forest trembled as if in response, the roots shifting beneath her feet, the wind howling louder. But Claire didn't look back. She took another step and then another, pushing forward. Her breath came faster now, her steps growing steadier. The hunger still roared in her chest, a constant companion, but now she controlled it. She could feel it, still gnawing at her, but it no longer defined her. She was no longer a puppet of the forest. She had chosen. Luke's voice echoed once more in her mind. You can still remember. You can still fight. The forest trembled again, but this time it was different. The trees groaned not with hunger, but with something else. Something ancient and forgotten. And Claire, the woman she had once been, felt it. She had chosen. The darkness around her receded, not entirely, but enough for her to see the path ahead. A narrow trail leading deeper into the woods. The hunger still tugged at her, but it wasn't all that there was. There was a future, there was a choice. For the first time in so long, Claire felt free. Claire's heart beat louder now, more determined with each step she took. She could feel the tug of the forest behind her, the gnawing hunger in her bones, but it was fading. Slowly, like an old wound that had begun to heal. The trees, once towering and oppressive, seemed to recede into the distance as she pressed forward, her eyes fixed on the narrow path that wound through the shadows ahead. It was no longer the forest she had known. It was something else. It was wild, untamed, a place between worlds, where reality itself seemed to bend and warp, where the air hummed with the energy of ancient forces long forgotten. The hunger still stirred in the depths of her chest, like a beast that would never truly be tamed, but now, it was only a whisper in the back of her mind. It didn't own her. Not anymore. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for a single person to walk, and the trees around her pressed in on all sides. Their branches twisted and clawed at the air, reaching toward her like fingers, but they were no longer threatening. They seemed to be waiting. Waiting for what? Claire didn't know. She didn't care. She had made her choice. As she walked deeper into the woods, the sounds of the forest seemed to change. The usual rustling of leaves, the creaking of the branches, the whisper of the wind, all of it faded. The deeper she went, the quieter it became. It was as though the forest itself had withdrawn, had lost interest in her. She was no longer the forest's servant, no longer its instrument. She was a stranger here now. Her boots crunched softly against the forest floor, each step marking a new moment, a new decision. Her mind buzzed with fragments of memories, of what she had once been, what she had once wanted. The life she had known before the forest had claimed her, before the hunger had consumed her. And look, she could still hear his voice, faint but steady in the back of her mind. He had called to her, had reminded her that there was more than the hunger, that she still had the power to choose. And in that moment, standing in the clearing, when she had reached out to him, when she had almost given in, it was his face that had saved her. His voice had cut through the darkness like a knife. You still have a choice, he had said. She could still feel the warmth of his touch, the way his hand had trembled when he reached for her, even though he was no longer the man he had been. Even though the forest had changed him, broken him into something unrecognizable. He had been Luke, but he had also been lost. Just like her. Claire stopped, her breath hitching as she reached a fork in the path. Two narrow trails split in front of her, each leading into the unknown, each vanishing into the thick, dark woods. There was no sign, no clue as to where either path might lead, and yet Claire felt an undeniable pull toward one of them. A strange, magnetic force that seemed to pull her, urging her to choose. She could feel it in her gut, a tug in her chest, like a thread was pulling her forward. Which path? She had made so many choices in her life, but this one felt different. This was the first time she truly felt like she was choosing. Choosing her future, choosing who she would become. She wasn't just following the forest's call anymore. She wasn't just a puppet of its hunger. She was choosing who she would be. Without thinking, her feet carried her toward the left path. It was the one that felt warmer, the one that called to her in a way that seemed more familiar, more inviting. As she stepped onto it, the trees above seemed to part slightly, as if giving her space to move forward. The air grew lighter, less oppressive. For the first time in so long, she felt the weight of the world lifting, as if the forest's grasp on her was loosening. The hunger still pulsed faintly, but now it felt distant, like something outside of her, something she could control. She walked for what felt like hours, the path winding through the trees, twisting and turning as though it were leading her somewhere. Somewhere she couldn't yet see. The light that filtered through the canopy grew brighter, warmer. It was like the forest itself was shifting, becoming something new, something alive in a way that she hadn't felt before. And then, as if by fate, she stepped into another clearing. But this was different. This was not the cold, empty space she had wandered into before. This was a place filled with light. The sunlight broke through the trees, casting golden beams of light onto the soft moss-covered ground. The air was sweet, almost intoxicating, and the forest around her was alive in a way that felt almost human, like it was breathing with her, watching her with an understanding that went beyond the hunger, beyond the trees. In the center of the clearing stood a figure. A tall figure, draped in robes of white, their face obscured by a hood, but there was no mistaking the power that radiated from them. Claire's heart skipped a beat. This figure, this presence was different. It felt like something ancient, something wise, something beyond the forest itself. A figure that didn't belong here, yet somehow did. The figure turned toward her, and Claire froze, her breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to slow. The wind stilled, the leaves ceased their rustling. Everything was quiet, as if the forest itself held its breath. "You've come far, child," the figure spoke, its voice deep, resonant, yet strangely soothing. It was a voice that carried the weight of ages, the voice of something timeless. "But the path you have chosen is not an easy one. The hunger will always be with you. The forest will always call you back. But you have more than the forest. You have choice. And that is what sets you apart." Claire's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I've made my choice. I walked away. I don't belong to the forest anymore." The figure's head tilted slightly, as though considering her words. "The forest is not a place, child. It is a force. It is a part of you as much as you are a part of it. It is a reflection of all that is within you. The hunger, the desire, the fear. It is the shadow you cast on the world, and it will always be there, lurking just beneath the surface. But you are more than the shadow. You are the light that can break through it. The path you walk will not be easy, but it is the path to your true self, the path to freedom." Claire swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "But what if I'm not strong enough? What if the hunger is too much?" The figure stepped forward, the light around them growing brighter. "Strength is not in what you can withstand, but in what you choose to release. You've already begun. You have taken the first step toward what lies beyond the hunger. But the journey is yours to complete. It is your choice." The figure raised a hand, and with it, the air around them shimmered. A vision appeared in the space before Claire's eyes. A vision of the forest, yes, but not the one she had come to know. This forest was wild, untamed, but not hungry. It was a place where the trees stretched upward toward the sky, where the light was not smothered by shadows, but embraced by them. It was a place of balance, where light and dark, hunger and peace, could exist together. "This," the figure said, "is what you seek. This is what lies beyond the hunger. But it is yours to create." And with that, the vision faded. The light dimmed, the figure stepped back, and the forest seemed to breathe again, its trees whispering in the distance. Claire stood there, alone once more, the weight of her choice heavy on her shoulders. The path ahead of her was still unclear. The hunger still pulsed, but now she knew it was something she could control. It was a part of her, yes, but it was not all of her. The figure had shown her something. A way forward. And now it was up to her to take the next step. Claire stood alone in the clearing, the figure's words still ringing in her ears like a distant echo. The air around her buzzed with energy, the very atmosphere vibrating with the weight of the decision that lay before her. She could feel the pull of the hunger deep within her, the familiar gnawing sensation that had once been so all-consuming. But now it felt distant. It felt controllable. She wasn't a slave to it anymore. The forest had always been a labyrinth, an unyielding, ever-changing mass of shadows and whispers. But now it felt like something more. Something vast and ancient, yet alive, as if it were breathing with her. She had stepped into a place beyond what she had known, beyond the hunger, beyond the darkness. But where did it lead? What awaited her now? For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she wasn't sure. The path ahead of her was unclear, like the forest itself had shifted, making way for something new, something unknown. She could feel the eyes of the trees on her, could hear their whispers, but they weren't the same. They weren't the hungry, desperate whispers of the past. These were waiting whispers, waiting to see what she would do next. The hunger still clawed at her chest, but now it felt like a reminder rather than a chain. A part of her, yes, but no longer the force that drove her every step. There was something else in her heart now, an ember, small but growing. The idea that she could be more. The knowledge that she could be free. Taking a deep breath, Claire turned away from the clearing, from the figure who had guided her, and continued down the path. Her steps were lighter now, as though the forest was no longer a prison, but a guide. The air seemed less oppressive, the shadows around her less consuming. For the first time she felt a strange sense of hope. But that hope was fleeting. For as she moved deeper into the woods, the forest seemed to shift again as though it were testing her. The trees leaned in, their branches clawing at the sky. The wind howled once more, louder this time, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble with a quiet, ominous energy. She wasn't alone. The hunger flared within her, a sudden, sharp pang that made her stop in her tracks. It was as though the forest itself was sensing her wavering, sensing her uncertainty. The trees groaned in unison, their branches moving as if in some silent command, and the wind shifted to a harsh, biting chill. Claire's chest tightened, the weight of the forest's gaze pressing down on her. But she didn't retreat. She didn't give in. Her fingers brushed against the bark of the nearest tree, and for the first time she felt a connection to it. Not one of hunger, not one of consumption, but something else. The tree's rough surface seemed to pulse beneath her touch, as though it were alive, aware. As though it were waiting for her to speak. "I choose freedom." The words came unbidden from her lips. The forest didn't respond at first. The wind didn't stir. The trees didn't groan. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the ground beneath her feet softened. The darkness receded ever so slightly, revealing a sliver of light. The path ahead seemed clearer now, the shadows thinning, as if the forest itself had accepted her choice. She exhaled, but the sense of unease didn't leave her. She could feel the weight of the forest's ancient watchfulness pressing in on her. It was as if she had entered a place where the very laws of the world, of life and death, of light and shadow, were in flux. And then something moved. A shadow at the edge of her vision caught her eye, and Claire froze. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she was certain she had seen it. A figure moving between the trees, just out of sight. A fleeting glimpse of movement that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Her heart raced. It wasn't the hunger this time, but something else. Something unfamiliar. A presence that didn't belong to the forest, but was of it. She didn't hesitate. She started moving again, faster now, her senses on high alert. Her boots crunched against the damp earth, her breath shallow and quick. The trees closed in around her, and the path before her twisted and turned, as though it were trying to lose her. But she pressed forward, her hand brushing the bark of each tree she passed, grounding herself with every touch. The presence, whatever it was, seemed to follow her, always just out of reach but never far behind. Suddenly, the path opened up into another clearing. The light here was different, darker, colder, the air thick with a sense of something ancient and forgotten. At the center of the clearing stood a massive stone pillar, blackened with age, its surface etched with symbols Claire couldn't understand. The pillar seemed to hum, resonating with a strange energy that pulled at her chest, making her heart race. The figure was there again, standing by the pillar. It was tall, slender, and draped in dark robes that billowed unnaturally around them. Their face was obscured by a hood, but Claire could feel the weight of their gaze as though it were pressing into her very soul. The figure raised a hand, and the air around them rippled like water. A low, deep hum filled the clearing, and Claire felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The hunger stirred again, louder now, roaring in her ears, but the strange energy from the pillar counteracted it, filling her with a strange sense of calm. "You've come far," the figure said, their voice echoing with the same deep resonance she had heard from the one who had guided her earlier. But this was different. The voice was cold, devoid of warmth, as though it carried the weight of countless centuries of darkness. "But this is where your choice will be tested. The hunger is a part of you as much as the forest is, but if you want true freedom, you must face it. You must face yourself." Claire swallowed, her mouth dry. She took a step forward, but the hunger inside her roared in defiance, pushing her back. The figure's words weighed heavily on her. She had thought she had escaped, that she had chosen freedom, but now it seemed there was a final test. "Face it," the figure repeated, their voice like a whisper on the wind, "and the forest will show you the way. But know this, there is no true freedom without sacrifice. You must choose between what you have become and what you were always meant to be." The hunger inside Claire surged again, but it wasn't the gnawing, desperate hunger she had known. It was something deeper, something older. It was a pull to the stone, to the figure, to the very heart of the forest itself. The decision was hers. Would she face what the forest had made her? Would she confront the hunger, the darkness, the roots of her very being? Or would she walk away, leaving behind everything she had become, everything she had fought for? For the first time, Claire understood the weight of her choice. And this time she wasn't running. The true path lay ahead. The figure before Claire remained silent for a moment, their presence like a weight pressing into the air around her. The wind had died, and the forest had become unnervingly still, as though holding its breath. Every sense Claire had, every shred of her being, was drawn to the stone pillar at the center of the clearing. It stood there, dark and ancient, humbling her with its unyielding presence. The symbols etched deep into its surface glowed faintly, pulsing with an eerie energy. And within that pulse she could feel the hunger stirring again, deeper this time, purer, rawer, more ancient than anything she had ever known. Claire clenched her fists, her body trembling as she fought to hold on to herself, to resist the pull of the forest. The hunger howled inside her, pulling her toward the pillar, toward the figure. Her breath quickened, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. Every step she had taken so far, every choice she had made, had led her to this moment. And now the true test awaited. The hunger is your legacy, the figure's voice spoke again, its deep resonance filling the clearing. But it is not all you are. You have the power to break free, to release the chains the forest has placed upon you. But only if you can face what you have become. Only if you can accept the truth of your existence. The figure stepped closer, their hood still obscuring their face, but Claire could feel their gaze cutting through her, deep into her soul. You were not born to the forest. You were not born to hunger. You were once something else, something more. But the forest has claimed you, and now you must choose. Will you become its servant forever, feeding its insatiable hunger? Or will you release yourself and reclaim the light that is still within you? Claire swallowed, her throat tight with fear. The hunger inside her was deafening now, a constant, pulsing beat in her chest. It threatened to drown out everything else. It had always been with her, every step she had taken, every choice she had made. It was the thing that had driven her, that had shaped her, that had made her who she was. Could she really walk away from it? Could she truly give up the power it gave her? Her hands shook as she reached for the stone pillar, drawn to it like a magnet. The symbols glowed brighter as her fingers touched its surface, and the energy surged through her, crackling in the air, seeping into her very being. She could feel the pull, the deep, insistent pull, urging her to give in, to accept the hunger, to become one with the forest. The figure's voice echoed in her mind, soft but insistent. You have to decide, Claire. And suddenly everything clicked into place. She had decided. She had been deciding all along. The hunger had always been a part of her. It had defined her, consumed her, but it had also been her strength. It had given her power. But that power came at a cost. Her humanity, her freedom, her very soul. Now, standing in this ancient clearing, faced with the embodiment of her deepest fears and desires, Claire knew what she had to do. She knew what was truly at stake. The hunger, the forest, the power, it was all a lie. It was a prison. And she had been living in it, chained by her own desires. The path forward wasn't one of more power, more control. It was one of letting go, of releasing what had consumed her for so long. Her gaze flickered to the figure in front of her, and for the first time she saw something beneath their hood. Not a face, not a body, but a light, an ethereal glow, soft and inviting like the first rays of dawn. It wasn't their light, Claire realized. It was her own. A light that had been buried deep inside her, hidden beneath the hunger, beneath the forest's claims. The light was still there. Let it go, Claire, the figure's voice said softly, almost tenderly. You were not born to darkness. You were born to light. Let the hunger go. Let the forest go. Reclaim who you are. The hunger within her screamed in defiance, roaring louder than ever, pushing against her, clawing at her chest, demanding to be fed. The trees around her began to shake, their roots twisting and writhing beneath the ground. The air grew heavy again, thick with the weight of the forest's will. But this time Claire stood firm. She was no longer afraid. She was no longer running from the truth. The light inside her began to grow, slowly at first, like the flicker of a candle in the dark, but it spread with incredible speed. It spread through her chest, into her limbs, until it filled her entire body, chasing away the darkness, the hunger, the pain. The energy was warm and soothing, like sunlight breaking through the clouds after a storm. The hunger howled in agony, a shriek that filled the clearing and reverberated through the very fabric of the forest. But Claire didn't flinch. She didn't waver. She stood tall, feeling the light expand within her, filling the hollow spaces, filling the parts of her that the forest had claimed. The darkness could not survive in the face of this light. It was being purged. It was fading. With a final agonized scream, the hunger was gone, and the forest went silent. The stillness was deafening. Claire took a slow, steady breath, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt peace. The weight of the forest, the weight of the hunger, the weight of the choices she had made, all of it was gone. The forest had not destroyed her. It had changed her. But now she had changed it. She had broken free. The figure before her nodded slowly, their head tilting as if in approval. Their presence faded, and the golden light around them seemed to dissipate, leaving Claire standing alone in the clearing. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She was free. The forest was still around her, yes, but it was different now. It wasn't an enemy. It wasn't a prison. It was a part of the world just as she was. A wild, untamed place, yes, but no longer something that would consume her. No longer something that would claim her. The path before her opened up, and for the first time she saw it clearly. It wasn't a single road, a single choice. It was a vast, open expanse. The future. She could choose her path. She could choose her life. And with that realization, Claire took her first true step toward freedom, toward the future she had long since abandoned, leaving the forest behind, not as a prisoner, but as someone who had reclaimed her place in the world. She was no longer bound by the hunger. She was no longer defined by the forest. She was Claire, and the world was waiting. Claire stood in the center of the clearing, the remnants of the forest's shadow lifting from her, leaving behind a stillness that was unlike anything she had ever known. The hunger, that gnawing, ever-present force that had driven her, had consumed her, was gone. She felt empty in a way, but it was a relief. The weight of it was no longer a constant pressure on her chest. She could breathe deeply again, her lungs filling with air that didn't burn. Her skin, which had once felt like it was coated in an invisible layer of tension, now felt light, like the first breath of fresh air after a long storm. The forest had fallen silent, as though it too was waiting, watching, as if unsure what to make of the sudden shift in the energy that had once flowed so freely between Claire and the trees. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the vast expanse of the forest around her. The trees still loomed large, their twisted branches stretching high into the sky, but they no longer seemed menacing. They no longer whispered their insistent calls to her. They were simply trees, old and ancient, their roots tangled deeply in the earth, but no longer rulers of her fate. Claire's eyes fell on the stone pillar in the center of the clearing. It still stood tall, its surface glowing faintly in the low light as if it too were waiting for something. She felt a deep, resonant hum in her chest as she gazed at it. The pillar wasn't evil, it wasn't a trap. It was simply a marker, a reminder of where she had been and where she had come from. But she didn't need it anymore. She didn't need to be reminded of the hunger. She didn't need to be reminded of the forest. She was free. The path before her stretched out like an open invitation. She had no destination, no map. There was no certainty. There was only the road ahead, dark and winding, yes, but also full of possibility, full of life. Claire took a step forward, the first of many, and it felt like she was shedding the last remnants of the past, the last ties to the hunger, to the forest that had claimed her for so long. She had once thought that the forest had given her purpose, that the hunger had been her only truth, but now she understood. It had been a lie. She was more than the hunger. She was more than the forest. And for the first time in years, she felt something else stirring in her chest, a tiny spark of hope, a glimmer of who she had once been. Her heart beat steadily now, the rhythm calming her nerves. The path was long and unknown, but it was hers. The journey was hers to decide. With each step, she felt the pull of the unknown. She couldn't predict what lay ahead. The hunger, once her constant companion, was gone, but she was aware that there were other challenges, other forces in the world. The forest wasn't the only force that could bind her, but that didn't scare her. The fear was gone too. She had faced the forest's darkness, faced the parts of herself that she had buried, and now she was ready to walk away from it, to walk toward a future where she could choose again, choose what she wanted, choose who she was. There would be no more darkness. There would be no more hunger. There would only be choices. Her mind wandered back to the figure in the clearing, the one who had guided her, who had reminded her of the light inside her. They had told her the truth. She wasn't born to darkness. She was born to light, to freedom, to a life beyond the chains that the forest had wrapped around her. She had reclaimed that truth. She had chosen to walk in the light, to be the light. But she also knew that the world wasn't as simple as the forest. There were things out there, things that could pull at her, tempt her, just as the hunger had. She could already feel the stirrings of something deep inside her, a need to test the waters, to push against the new boundaries she had set. But she wasn't afraid. She was free to choose her path. The world outside the forest called to her now, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel tethered. The sense of being lost, of being consumed by forces beyond her control, was gone. The world was vast, filled with people, with places, with adventures, and for the first time, Claire knew she could find her place in it. She felt something, hope, beginning to grow inside her, like a seed that had been planted deep within her chest. The hunger was gone, but in its place there was a space for something better, something warmer, something that could sustain her. The light within her was like a beacon, ready to shine for the first time in her life. And yet, as she walked further along the path, a strange feeling began to creep into her chest, a sense of longing, not for the forest, not for the hunger, but for something more. She stopped, gazing ahead at the path, her thoughts swirling. She had been so focused on breaking free, on leaving the forest behind, that she hadn't stopped to think about what came next. There was no one waiting for her, no one who had ever known her outside of the forest. She had been alone for so long, trapped in the cycle of the hunger and the forest grasp, that she had forgotten what it was like to live in the world, to belong to something more than the shadows. Her fingers brushed the bark of a nearby tree, the texture grounding her in the moment. The trees around her were no longer a threat. They were simply trees. But somewhere deep in her heart, Claire realized something else. They were part of her journey. They were part of her growth. They were a part of her past, and though she would never return to that darkness, she could remember the lessons it had taught her. It's okay to remember, she thought, as a small, genuine smile tugged at her lips. The hunger was gone, but the forest had shaped her, and those shapes would always be a part of her. She could walk away from it, yes, but she could also carry it with her. The lessons she had learned, the strength, the will to survive, the courage to choose her own path, those were hers now. With a deep breath, Claire took another step forward. The trees parted before her, as though acknowledging her passage. The path was still long, and it was still unknown, but that was part of the adventure. The freedom she had fought for. The freedom she had earned. She was no longer the woman who had been consumed by hunger. She was no longer the woman who had been swallowed by the forest's darkness. She was someone else now. Someone who could choose, who could walk in the light, who could live. And that was enough. The forest began to thin as Claire walked, the once dense trees giving way to more open ground. The path before her stretched out in a gentle curve, leading her toward something unknown, but for the first time, Claire didn't feel uncertain. Her mind was clear, her heart steady. There were no longer any invisible threads pulling at her, no dark whispers calling her back into the shadows. For the first time, the air felt crisp, pure, free. But despite the vastness of the open land ahead, a quiet, aching pull tugged at her chest. It wasn't the hunger. It wasn't the forest's voice. It was the pull of newness, of a life she had yet to fully comprehend. She had stepped away from everything she knew, and though the feeling was exhilarating, it was also heavy with the unknown. Every step she took was a step into uncharted territory. As she walked, the light grew stronger, piercing through the trees like a golden thread weaving through the dark fabric of the forest. The sun was low, just beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows that flickered across the ground. The temperature had dropped slightly, the evening air cool against her skin. But there was no fear now. There was only the quiet rhythm of her steps and the soft rustle of the leaves, as if the forest was whispering a soft farewell. It was no longer a place of dark promises or painful memories. It was simply a part of her past, a shadow that had shaped who she was now. The light began to shift around her, turning the forest into a painting, rich with golds and browns, blues and reds. It was beautiful, but it felt different than before. It was not a beauty she had once known, the dangerous, intoxicating beauty of the forest that had entranced her, the kind of beauty that masked its darkness. This beauty was real. She had been so consumed with the forest's grasp, so lost in its endless hunger, that she hadn't stopped to notice how it was all just a mask, an illusion of power, an illusion of control. Now she saw the world for what it was, complex, multifaceted, and real. It was no longer just shadow or light. It was both, and Claire could live in that balance. A sense of freedom settled over her, like a soft blanket that wrapped around her shoulders. She wasn't running from something anymore. She was walking toward something. Toward her life. Toward her future. The path soon opened up into a wide, expansive meadow. The air smelled fresh here, like wet earth and wildflowers, a stark contrast to the sterile, suffocating air of the forest. Claire stopped for a moment, standing at the edge of the meadow, taking in the vastness before her. The meadow stretched on for miles, dotted with wild grasses and delicate flowers. In the distance, she could see the faint outline of mountains, tall, jagged peaks rising against the sky, their tops kissed with the last light of the day. For a brief moment, she simply stood there, letting the peace of the place wash over her. She hadn't realized just how long it had been since she'd felt the warmth of the sun on her face, since she'd been able to breathe in the air without feeling like something was closing in on her. The meadow was open, untouched, and it was hers to explore. As Claire took a step forward, she noticed a figure in the distance, moving across the field. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but as she focused, the figure grew clearer. It was a person, a traveler, perhaps. She could see the movement of their silhouette against the fading light, the way they moved with purpose, but also with a certain care, as though they were making their way slowly, deliberately, through the vast open space. Her heart quickened, a spark of curiosity igniting in her chest. She hadn't seen anyone in so long, certainly no one who wasn't a part of the forest's thrall. The last time she'd been around people, it had been a time before the hunger had fully taken over, before the forest had claimed her. As the figure drew closer, Claire slowed her pace, unsure of how to react. She hadn't expected to meet anyone out here. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to stand in the presence of another person. She had been alone for so long, bound to the forest, to the hunger, that the idea of being with someone again felt almost foreign. The figure stopped when they saw her, pausing in their tracks. There was a long, tense moment between them. Claire felt her breath catch in her throat. It was as though the space between them had grown wider, the air thick with anticipation. Then the figure spoke, their voice low and calm, carrying across the meadow with surprising clarity. "I didn't think I would find anyone here," they said. "Not this deep into the wilds." Claire didn't immediately respond, unsure of what to say. But something about their voice, there was a kindness in it, an openness that immediately made her feel at ease, even if she didn't fully understand why. Her own voice came out softer than she expected. "I didn't expect to find anyone either." The figure nodded, a knowing expression on their face. "There's always someone out here," they said, their gaze scanning the vast expanse of the meadow. "You just have to know where to look." They paused, as if considering her for a moment. "You're not from around here, are you?" Claire's heart skipped a beat. For a second she thought of the forest, of everything that had come before. The hunger, the darkness, the fear. She thought of the path she had left behind, of everything she had shed to stand here now. "No," she finally said, her voice stronger now. "I'm not." The figure studied her for a moment longer, their eyes narrowing as though seeing something they hadn't expected. "You look like you've been through quite a journey," they said, their voice laced with quiet curiosity. "And from the look on your face, I'd say you're not running anymore." Claire's breath hitched at their words. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't running from the forest, from the hunger, from herself. She was here, in the world, a world that was still waiting for her to embrace it. It had all seemed so distant, so unreachable. But here she was, standing on the precipice of something new. The figure extended a hand, a silent offering. "If you're willing to walk with me, we can head toward the mountains. There's a village at the foot of them, a place where people still remember what it's like to be free. Maybe it's time you found your place there." Claire looked at the hand, and for a moment she hesitated. Her journey had been long, and the thought of stepping into a new world, a new life, was both terrifying and exhilarating. The road ahead was unknown, but for the first time that was a welcome thought. She reached out, her fingers brushing against theirs. "Lead the way," she said, her voice calm but full of determination. And as they walked together toward the mountains, Claire knew that the path ahead would be filled with challenges, with twists and turns, with moments of doubt. But it would also be filled with light. The light of choice, the light of freedom. The light of her. For the first time, she could truly say that she was not bound by anything anymore. Not the hunger, not the forest, not the shadows of her past. She was free to choose her own story. And her story, whatever it might be, had only just begun. As Claire and the traveler walked side by side, the meadow stretched endlessly before them. The gentle rustling of the grass was the only sound that broke the silence, a soft lullaby carried on the evening breeze. The light of the setting sun cast long, slanted shadows across the land, painting everything in hues of orange and gold. With each step, the tension that had been wound tight in Claire's chest seemed to ease a little more. She had walked through so much darkness, had lived under the weight of so many fears. And now the world felt open, expansive, full of potential. Her eyes wandered over the traveler beside her. They were tall, lean, with a worn cloak draped over their shoulders and boots that had clearly seen many miles. Their face was partially shadowed by the hood they wore, but there was something about their presence that felt calming, grounded. They didn't speak much as they walked, but every so often, their eyes would flicker toward Claire, as though sensing her unspoken questions. The path they followed curved gently through the meadow, eventually leading to a narrow, rocky trail that wound its way up toward the mountains. The sky above was painted in shades of dusky purple and deep blue, the first stars beginning to twinkle faintly in the heavens. There was a peacefulness in the air, and though the journey ahead was still unknown, Claire couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settling in her chest. They walked for a while, the only sounds the crunch of their feet against the gravel and the occasional soft exhale of the traveler beside her. After some time they reached the foot of the mountains. Towering peaks loomed ahead, their jagged edges dark against the evening sky. A small stream trickled down from the mountain range, its waters sparkling in the dimming light, weaving its way through the path before them. The travelers slowed their pace and glanced at Claire. "It's not much further now," they said, their voice calm but tinged with a quiet urgency. "The village is nestled in the valley beyond those ridges. It's hidden from most. People often miss it if they don't know where to look." Claire nodded, taking in the beauty of the mountains around her. The air here was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and fresh water, and she found herself breathing deeply as though absorbing the purity of the land. The last time she had felt this free, this open, was before the forest had consumed her, before the hunger had been her constant companion. She had forgotten what it was like to feel truly alive. "Why is the village hidden?" Claire asked, curiosity bubbling up in her chest. She glanced at the traveler, but their expression remained inscrutable, their eyes shadowed beneath the hood. "Is there something special about it?" The traveler's pace slowed even more, and they glanced around as though ensuring no one else was listening. The quiet of the mountains seemed to deepen, a hush falling over the landscape. After a long pause, the traveler spoke, their voice low. "It's not that the village is hidden exactly," they began. "It's more that it's protected. Most people, even those who wander these parts, don't know it exists. The valley is shielded by the mountains, by the land itself. Some say it's magic. Others say it's just the way the land has always been. But the people there, those who have chosen to live there, are different. They're not like the rest of the world. They live in peace, untouched by the chaos and the hunger that consumes so much of the world outside." Claire felt a strange pull in her chest, a stirring at the edges of her soul. She had walked through so much darkness, so much pain, that the idea of peace, true peace, seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Could there really be such a place? A place untouched by the hunger? A place where people had chosen to live free? As if sensing her thoughts, the traveler continued. "The village is a sanctuary for those who seek it. But it's not easy to get there. It's not just about walking through the mountains, it's about understanding the land, the people, and the way things are done. There's a balance there. An old balance that has kept the place safe for generations." Claire's heart raced. A sanctuary. A place of peace. A place where she could be more than the remnants of her past, more than the echoes of hunger and forest. The thought filled her with a deep sense of yearning, a longing for something she hadn't realized she was searching for until now. They walked on, their journey taking them higher into the mountains. The terrain became steeper, the air thinner, but Claire didn't mind. Each step felt like a victory, a step farther away from the past, a step closer to whatever awaited her at the end of this path. As they crested a ridge, Claire saw it in the distance. The village. Nestled in a valley between the towering peaks, the village seemed almost otherworldly. The houses were made of stone, with thatched roofs, their walls adorned with ivy and moss, blending seamlessly into the landscape. Soft light spilled from the windows, warm and inviting, casting long shadows across the land. It was quiet here, peaceful. The air was alive with the hum of the stream that ran through the heart of the village, and the scent of burning wood and fresh bread wafted up from the hearths. As they descended toward the village, Claire felt her heart swell. She had come so far, walked through the darkness, fought the hunger, and now she had found her way to this place. She didn't know what would happen when they arrived, but she felt that something inside her had already begun to heal. The path ahead was still unknown, but for the first time she wasn't afraid. The traveler paused at the edge of the village, their silhouette outlined against the dimming sky. "I'll take you to the elders," they said. "They'll decide what to do with you." Claire felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her, but she steadied herself, taking a deep breath. She had come this far. She had shed the chains of her past. Whatever the elders of this village had to say, she was ready to face it. The traveler turned and led her into the village, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath them. As they passed the first houses, Claire caught glimpses of the villagers, people who seemed so at ease, so calm, as though the weight of the world had never touched them. She saw women tending to gardens, men carrying firewood, children playing in the streets, their laughter floating through the air like a melody. This was the peace the traveler had spoken of. This was the world Claire had been searching for. At the heart of the village stood a large stone building, its walls adorned with intricate carvings of animals and trees, the symbols of a world in harmony. The traveler led her inside, where the air was warmer, filled with the scent of herbs and incense. At the center of the room sat several older figures, their faces weathered but wise, their eyes bright with an understanding that seemed to go beyond the physical world. One of the elders, an older woman with silver hair and a voice like honey, looked up as Claire entered. "Ah," she said softly, her eyes flicking between Claire and the traveler. "Another lost soul seeking refuge, I presume?" Claire nodded, her throat tight. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she could put into words what had brought her here, or what she was hoping to find. The elder smiled kindly. "It's not unusual," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "The world outside these mountains can be harsh. Many come to us seeking peace, seeking balance. You are welcome here if that is what you truly seek. But the first step is always a choice. A choice." Claire's heart swelled with emotion. She had made so many choices already. She had chosen to leave the forest, to release the hunger, to walk towards something new. And now this was a place where she could choose again. A place where she could build a new future, free from the shadows of her past. "Yes," Claire said, her voice steady now. "I seek peace." The elder nodded, her eyes warm and knowing. "Then welcome home." The elder's words hung in the air, a quiet promise that Claire felt reverberate in the deepest corners of her being. Welcome home. It wasn't a statement she had expected, but it was exactly what she needed to hear. The weight of everything she had left behind, the hunger, the forest, the uncertainty, began to lift. It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it felt like a distant echo now, fading into the background as she stood on the threshold of this new chapter in her life. The elder rose from her seat, her movements graceful despite her age. She studied Claire for a moment as though weighing her very soul. Then, with a slow nod, she gestured for Claire to follow her. "Come," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. "There is much to be learned here, and much to be unlearned as well." As Claire followed the elder through the stone hallways, she couldn't help but take in the details around her. The walls were adorned with carvings of trees, animals, and celestial symbols, each one intricate and full of meaning. The floors were covered with woven rugs, their patterns reminiscent of the forest's natural rhythm, but softer, more fluid, as though the land here had been molded by a gentler hand. The air smelled of herbs, wood, and earth, all things that felt alive in a way that was different from the forest. It was peaceful here, quiet and still, and the warmth that filled the space made her feel as though she had stepped into a place that was waiting for her. The elder led her to a small, private room at the back of the building. The room was simple, no grand adornments, no trinkets or unnecessary decor. It was calming in its simplicity, with soft lighting and the faint scent of lavender in the air. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm, flickering shadows on the stone walls. A small bed made of thick woven blankets and a low wooden table with a few chairs were the only furnishings. The elder motioned to the table where a teapot sat, steam rising from it. "Sit, drink, rest. You've come far and you must be weary." Claire hesitated for a moment before sitting down. It felt strange to be offered rest, to be given space to simply be after everything she had endured. She realized that for the first time in a long time, she felt no immediate urgency. There was no hunger clawing at her insides, no forest that demanded her attention. There was just the present, this moment, this room, this peace. The elder poured tea into 2 cups, handing one to Claire. The liquid was a deep amber, it sent both sweet and herbal. "This is a blend of herbs from our gardens," the elder said, settling into a chair across from Claire. "It will help you sleep, but it will also help you clear your mind. You've come through much, perhaps more than you even realize." Claire accepted the cup, cradling it in her hands. The warmth from the tea seeped into her skin, and she closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the comfort of it. "I don't know if I even know who I am anymore," she admitted quietly. "I've spent so long running, so long fighting. I don't know how to stop." The elder's gaze softened, and she took a sip from her own cup. "There is no need to stop, child. Not unless you choose to. But there is a difference between running towards something and running away from something. And there is a difference between fighting because you must, and fighting because you believe it is the only way to survive." Claire met her gaze, feeling a strange pull to the wisdom in those words. "But what if I don't know what I'm running toward? What if I'm just lost?" The elder placed her cup down gently, her eyes never leaving Claire's. "It's not unusual to feel lost. Most people do at some point. But the truth is, Claire, you've been finding your way all along. You've come this far, despite the hunger, despite the darkness, despite everything. And now you stand here in this moment, choosing peace. That is no small thing." You are no longer defined by the hunger, by the forest, by the shadows of your past. You are defined by the choices you make now. And that is a powerful thing. Claire stared at the elder, the weight of her words sinking in. She had been so consumed by the fear of the past, by the desire to escape the hunger, that she hadn't fully realized the significance of what she had done. She had chosen to walk away. She had chosen to break free. And now she was here in this village, a place that seemed untouched by the darkness she had known. The elder continued, "You will need time to heal, Claire. Time to rediscover yourself. But it won't happen all at once. It will come in pieces as it always does. In moments of quiet, in the touch of the earth beneath your feet, in the songs of the birds that call to each other at dawn. You will begin to remember who you are, who you were, before the hunger, before the forest, before everything that took you away from yourself." Claire took a deep breath, allowing the stillness of the room to settle in her bones. She had been running for so long, always looking over her shoulder, always afraid of what might catch up to her. But now, for the first time, she realized that she didn't have to be afraid of what was behind her. What mattered was what lay ahead. The elder leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp and kind. "I know you are not yet whole, but you will be in time. The first step is to learn the ways of this place. The rhythms of life here are slower, gentler, but they are also deeper. There is strength in the quiet, Claire. Strength in stillness. And when you are ready, when you feel the time is right, you may choose to share your story with us. The villagers, those who have come to us for refuge, have much to offer. And I believe you will find something to offer them as well." Claire felt a flicker of hope in her chest, a sense of possibility that had long been absent. She didn't know what her future here would look like, or how long it would take her to truly heal. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She wasn't lost anymore. There was a place for her here. A place where she could rebuild, where she could choose to be something more than the echoes of her past. For the first time in what felt like forever, Claire felt the weight of her own future. The weight of a life that she could create from the ground up. It was hers to shape, hers to live. The elder smiled gently as if reading her thoughts. "Take your time. There is no rush here. When you are ready, you will know." The days in the village passed like a gentle current, slow but steady. Claire had never known peace like this. The stillness of the mountains, the rhythm of the village, it was as though time itself had been redefined. There was no rushing here, no pressure. Just a deep, soothing flow of life, measured by the rising and setting of the sun, the changing of seasons, the growth of the crops in the fields, and the quiet hum of community. At first, Claire had felt like an outsider, someone lost in the weight of her past, someone who didn't quite belong. The villagers were warm and welcoming, but she had been hesitant to fully let herself sink into the embrace of this new world. They had shared their stories with her, and in turn she had offered only fragments of her own. She had told them of the forest, of the hunger, of the darkness that had once consumed her, but each time she spoke, it felt like those words were slipping through her fingers like water. They were part of her, yes, but they didn't define her anymore. She was something else now, something quieter, something deeper. Each morning, Claire would wake early to the sound of birdsong, the gentle rustle of the trees outside her window. She had been given a small stone cottage at the edge of the village, nestled between two towering pines. It was simple, unadorned, but it was hers. The walls were bare save for a few small shelves of herbs and dried flowers. The bed was made of thick woolen blankets, and a small hearth sat in the corner, always ready to be lit. It was all she needed. She spent her mornings working with the other villagers in the gardens, learning the rhythms of planting, tending, and harvesting. The earth was rich here, fertile with the care the villagers had given it over generations. Claire had once feared the land, the hunger that had grown from it, but now, as her hands worked the soil, she felt the opposite, a connection to it. The earth was no longer something to fear. It was something that nurtured, something that gave. It was the very thing that had been denied to her when the hunger had taken hold, but now, it was her ally. One morning, as she worked alongside an older woman named Mara, who had taken Claire under her wing, Claire found herself lost in the rhythmic movements of weeding, tending, and planting. Mara spoke little, her hands steady as she worked, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. Mara had been through her own share of hardship, though Claire didn't know the details. She only knew that Mara was a woman who had learned to find peace, even in the most difficult of circumstances. Mara's silence was never heavy or oppressive. It was a quiet kind of wisdom, and it was in the spaces between words that Claire began to find something she hadn't known she was looking for. That afternoon, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Mara and Claire stood at the edge of the field, looking out at the mountain range in the distance. The light of the setting sun bathed everything in gold, the peaks bathed in a soft, warm glow. It was peaceful here. A world apart from the shadows Claire had once known. "You've come far, Claire," Mara said, breaking the silence between them. Her voice was quiet, but there was a deep strength in it. "The land knows you now. You've worked with it, not against it." Claire nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant peaks. "I never thought I could feel at peace with the earth. I was always afraid of what it might take from me." Mara smiled faintly, a knowing smile. "The earth does not take, child. It only gives. It gives in cycles. It gives in seasons. It gives life. But you must give in return. Not with your blood or your soul, but with your care, your patience, your understanding. The earth asks for nothing more." Claire stood there for a long time, lost in Mara's words. They were simple words, but they carried so much weight. For so long, Claire had thought that the earth was something to be conquered, something to be controlled. She had been consumed by the hunger, just as the forest had consumed her. But here, with Mara's quiet wisdom, she understood that the land didn't need to be conquered. It needed to be understood. It needed to be nurtured. Just as she had needed to understand herself, to nurture the parts of her that had once been lost, the earth needed that same care. That night, as Claire sat by her hearth, the fire crackling softly, she reflected on the day. She had begun to understand the rhythms of the village, the subtle ebb and flow of life here. She had learned the names of the plants in the garden, the ways of the seasons, the quiet conversations that could be had without words. But most importantly, she had learned that peace was not something that could be found in a single moment, a single place. Peace was something that had to be lived, in every breath, every gesture, every connection to the world around her. In the days that followed, Claire found herself becoming more and more intertwined with the fabric of village life. She helped the children gather herbs for the elders, shared stories with the other women by the fire, and assisted the men in repairing the stone walls that held the village together. It wasn't an easy life, but it was fulfilling in ways she hadn't anticipated. Each task, each day, each simple act of living was a piece of the puzzle that was slowly coming together. But even as Claire embraced this new life, she couldn't ignore the quiet stirrings within her. There was a restlessness inside her, a pull toward something greater, something beyond the borders of the village. She had shed the darkness of the forest, and she had found peace here, but there was still more to discover. More of the world, more of herself. She could feel it calling to her, the need to grow, to move, to seek. One evening, as the village prepared for the harvest festival, Claire found herself standing at the edge of the village again, looking out at the mountains. The festival was a time of celebration, of community, but Claire felt an odd sense of anticipation. The village had given her so much, peace, solace, a place to heal, but there was something else waiting for her. Something beyond this quiet sanctuary. The elder's words came back to her. The first step is always a choice. Claire had already made so many choices. She had chosen to leave the forest, to step away from the hunger, to embrace the peace of this place. But she knew there were still more choices to be made. As the night deepened and the stars filled the sky, Claire closed her eyes and whispered a quiet promise to herself. "I will not forget." She would not forget the journey that had brought her here, nor the strength it had taken to break free. She would honor this peace, but she would also honor the calling within her. The need to discover more, to experience more, to live fully. The village was a sanctuary, yes, but it was not the end of her story. It was just another beginning.